is the joint hearing of the Special Committee on Gun Violence Prevention in Children and Youth regarding resolution number 200524. I understand that the state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make this remote hearing possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Enquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearing, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Will the clerk please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that they are present when their names are called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen when you speak. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Helen Gim.
I am present. Good morning, Council Chair and colleagues.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and viewing public.
Councilmember Jamie Gaudier.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the public present.
Councilmember Isaiah Thomas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the public present.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez. Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Philadelphia.
Councilmember Mark Swilla.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Present.
And that is it for attendance for the roll, Mr. Chair.
Will the clerk please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 200524, authorizing the committees on gun violence prevention and children and youth to conduct joint hearings to examine the need for universal access to trauma counseling for Philadelphia's youth.
Thank you very much, Brett. Before we get started, I would like to turn over for remarks to my colleague, Councilman Helen Gim, who chairs the Children and Youth Committee.
Thank you so much, Chair. And first and foremost, I want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Johnson, for your long work in addressing gun violence, and in particular for partnering with the Committee on Children and Youth and ensuring that we can create space for this hearing to take place with a particular focus on the types of trauma supports that young people need in their lives. At this moment in our city's history, there's no question that we are sitting at the intersection of multiple crises. A public health crisis as we enter the final stages of dealing with this pandemic, an economic crisis due to the necessary but painful lockdowns to protect communities from the virus, and the escalating crisis of gun violence, an absolute public health emergency that we have seen here in Philadelphia as well as in other large cities around the country. Today, we're going to hear from people working both to prevent and respond to gun violence and trauma impacting youth in Philadelphia. I'll be listening very closely to the leaders of the school district and the Department of Behavioral Health, from doctors, social workers, and principals, and from leaders and community organizations that provide trauma counseling and other mental health services to young people in need. I want to especially thank Councilmember Johnson and the committees for being so focused on the importance of including youth voices and perspectives through this process. Yesterday afternoon, council members heard from young people who have been directly and indirectly impacted by gun violence. We had a youth roundtable in partnership with 5 extremely important organizations who are working directly with young people in our city. They were Philly, the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project, the Youth Arts and Self-Empowerment Project, the Juvenile Law Center, and the Village of Arts and Humanities. We kept this conversation private, in part because it was important to create a safe space for youth to share very personal and often difficult stories and experiences, and we all felt it. And to hear the recommendations for change and action. But I wanted, before we hear from a lot of the official agencies and many adults today, I did want to share a couple of themes that emerged during our roundtable yesterday. One of the most important things that you've told us is the importance of trusting relationships in their lives. When we're talking about grief, when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about vulnerabilities and violence, youth are not simply going to go to people because they have the title. They're going to go to the people that they trust, people with whom they've been in relationship with. And this has been an important aspect of how we talk to young people about violence. We also heard from young people that there are mental health supports that are needed to help young people facing depression and trauma. The need for real mentors to help young people navigate the incredibly difficult challenges they face and to be there for them in times of need. We also heard the importance of having sustainable jobs available to young people so they can earn a living to support themselves and their families. We heard from young people about the importance of programs and activities, extended hours in rec centers, or for places that welcome youth, providing meaningful engagement and safe spaces throughout the day and into the evening. And finally, we heard about the importance of housing stability, the need to potentially relocate when situations become untenable. And most important of all, the youth expressed to us that they're watching, that they understand that there are decisions that are made, but ultimately, if they don't feel those decisions, then they don't actually exist for them. I'm hoping that this hearing will expand upon our dialogue from yesterday to hear from people who are working inside systems, institutions, and organizations. These include the agencies, schools, hospitals, and nonprofits to understand what is already in place, what are barriers to expansion and gaps in services that exist, and that we listen from a place not of, defensiveness or, we understand that we're all doing a lot of this work. And our job is to reach young people in neighborhoods, to let them feel it, to live it, not just to have it exist within our own worlds and in our own lives, but to make sure that the young people who are truly a generation by whom we will be judged, not only in this moment, but 2 decades from now, when we have another generation of 15 to 30-year-olds, what will we have done for them in one of the most desperate sometimes and important moments in their lives? Our city has to do better. We heard that. We have to do more and we have to do better. And that does not impugn anything that has come before us. But this is a time for us to rise to the occasion, to meet the demands of our young people, and to give them a city that they truly deserve. So I want to thank Councilmember Johnson and thank you very much. Look forward to the hearing.
Thank you very much, Helen, and I just want to thank you for your advocacy around making sure we are supporting and empowering and making sure we're fighting for our young people. And this issue is very near and dear to me, primarily because before I became elected official, I was always in the space of working in my neighborhood as a community organizer. But after listening to the young men who were talking about their experiences yesterday, it always brings back my memories as to how I became the person who I am and the different choices that I made in my life. A lot were bad or negative early on, in spite of coming from a good foundation, but nevertheless, the pearls of the street life kind of pulled me in different directions. And it was individuals like, not to really, that's the word I want to say, I'm going to give him his proper credit, as I always do. It's people like Curtis Jones, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself when I attended the Chocolate Fatah Graduate Opportunity Conference as a young man, when I had 1 foot in the streets and 1 foot at Mansfield University, or Hardy Williams, who met me as a young man at the University of Pennsylvania. And again, I had 1 foot in the University of Pennsylvania, but also another foot inside the streets. And so it was through that mentorship and other opportunities that helped me become the person who I am today. But I also made a lot of those decisions just based upon living in an area that was impacted by trauma. It's not normal for an individual to don't think that they're going to see the age of 18. And that was my lifestyle when I attended high school. But so many examples of other young men that live all throughout neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia. It's abnormal to live in a neighborhood where you see half of your friends die, right? Literally see them die as relates to the issue of gun violence. And so how are you processing that trauma? Do you decide to pick up a gun? Do you become more aggressive and be the individual that's not being a positive impact inside your community or make poor choices? So this particular hearing will allow us to look at what are we doing to not only support our young people, but also communities that are suffering, communities that are shell-shocked and impacted as it relates to the trauma and the gun violence that they're seeing, and making sure we're doing everything possible to support our youth and to support our communities. And so with that being said, we're going to ask for the clerk to please call on the first panel.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I placed in the chat. I had a very quick comment. I just wanted to thank you and Councilmember Gim for this hearing today, and especially thank Councilmember Gim for pulling together the roundtable of the young people yesterday. And I really was struck by a lot of the information that was shared, and appreciated having the opportunity to hear directly from young people they need to help them thrive here in the city of Philadelphia. And I'm still replaying a lot of what I heard yesterday, but it was very clear from what we heard that we have to do more, that we have to prioritize what the young people are asking us for. They are crying out to have opportunities, to have safe spaces. They are crying out to ensure that when there are conflicts in their communities, that they have the opportunity to relocate. That was so poignant, and I heard that on that call. So I just wanted to say thank you to you, but especially to Councilmember Gim for providing that opportunity yesterday. And we are looking forward to also our upcoming hearing on conflict resolution and releasing the report, which will be next week on Wednesday, April 14th at 10 a.m. in the Committee on Education. And I invite you all to come back to help us talk about that issue as well. But I wanted to say thank you and look forward to this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councilman Catherine Gilmore Richardson. I'm going to ask for the clerk to read the portion of the script regarding individuals who will be testifying. I'm having a little technical difficulties.
Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this is a public hearing and it is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy, and by continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing any questions or comments from the members that they have for witnesses, we will note that for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for that purpose.
Will the clerk please call the first panel?
Dr. Jill Bowen, Karen Lynch, and Dr. Tanya Woolford.
Good morning.
Bowen. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairpersons Kenyatta Johnson and Helen Gim, and members of the Special Committee on Gun Violence and the Committee on Children and Youth. I am Dr. Jill Bowen, Commissioner of the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, DBH-IDS. Joining me today is Yolanda Hughes, Director of Trauma Response and Emergency Preparedness, who provides direct oversight for the Network of Neighbors Initiative on behalf of DBH-IDS. I also have with me Dr. Tamara Williams, Deputy Chief Clinical Officer, Children's Services for Community Behavioral Health. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in response to Resolution number 200524, which authorizes hearings to examine the need for universal access to trauma counseling for Philadelphia's youth. Today, I will speak about trauma and the significant impact it has on children, youth, and communities across Philadelphia. I will share some of the resources available through DBHIDS, Community Behavioral Health, and the vast provider network, and share information on established strategies and partnerships that help us mobilize supports. Trauma poses a significant threat to the overall health and well-being of our city. It affects not only survivors of traumatic experiences, but impacts family members, friends, and communities. In 2020, Philadelphia had the highest number of homicides in 30 years, and in 2021, we continue to see increased incidents of gun violence, many frequently involving young people. Furthermore, we know that these incidents disproportionately impact communities of color due to systemic racism, pervasive poverty, and a high prevalence of adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are traumatic events that occur in childhood between ages 0 and 17. Experience or witnessing violence is one of several possible adverse childhood experiences. ACEs are linked to chronic physical health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood, and can negatively impact education and job opportunities. Working together to support parents and caregivers, we can lessen the impact of ACEs on children by assuring safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments. In addition, there is strong evidence that cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can reduce symptoms such as anxiety and depression for youth who have experienced trauma. To address trauma, DBHIDS has developed a variety of strategic partnerships and evidence-based practices. DBHIDS has been an active participant in the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities since its inception in 2019. We serve on the executive implementation team, the social services work group for group violence intervention, and the tactical team, and have deployed multiple trauma supports and services in response to incidents of gun violence across the city to connect individuals and families to needed supports and help communities heal. One promising trauma-informed care practice for intervention and prevention of future violence is warm handoffs in the hospital's emergency departments. Healing Hurt People provides trauma-informed case management services, peer mentoring, and referral linkages for individuals between 10 and 29 years of age. DBHIDS also continues to support the efforts of Temple University's Ceasefire Cure Violence program, a community-based violence intervention program that serves individual survivors of gun violence in the 22nd and parts of the 39th District. The Philadelphia Alliance for Child Trauma Services, PACS, is a network of child-serving systems and organizations whose mission is to increase the number of youth receiving effective, trauma-focused, and trauma-informed care in Philadelphia. Before PACS was implemented in 2012, there were only 3 behavioral health agencies that specialized in pediatric trauma. Today, there are approximately 118 active, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral treatment trained clinicians and 31 primary child-adult relationship enhancement trained clinicians across 20 locations and 16 provider agencies. Through Intensive Behavioral Health Services, IBHS, we offer a full continuum of supports for children in schools as well as the community. CBH contracts with 27 agencies to provide school-based behavioral health services in 246 schools across 46 zip codes. Providers have already been engaged in cognitive behavioral therapy training and will ultimately be trained as well in cognitive behavioral intervention for trauma in schools, or CBITS, and Bounce Back, which is group therapy for elementary age children who are experiencing traumatic stress. Other supports provided by DBHIDS in schools include school-based prevention services. Prevention programs are provided by 12 agencies in approximately 90 schools and have also expanded their programming into an additional 21 high-risk zip code schools. Topics include conflict resolution, decision-making, skills for positive peer interactions, and alcohol, tobacco, and drug education. In addition to our treatment approaches, we offer various community-based programs, including the Network of Neighbors Responding to Violence, or the Network. The network responds to the traumatic stress associated with community violence, sudden loss, tragic accidents, suicides, burnout, or ongoing circumstances, such as living or working in a neighborhood plagued by high rates of gun violence. The network trains community members to support and lead responses to trauma and violence within their communities, and aligns local and citywide supports to protect the safety, dignity, and voice of the impacted community. The network utilizes the ASK model, providing support when invited by the community. All supports are focused on strengthening local efforts, reducing stress and isolation, encouraging peer support and connection. If a community is experiencing heightened stress, they can contact the network to discuss the situation and available supports at networkofneighbors@phila.gov. Trauma impacts our minds, our bodies, our relationships, and our communities. Addressing trauma means finding ways to prevent it, enhancing systems that relieve it, and supporting treatments that alleviate it. DBH-IDS hosts trainings that work to create trauma-reducing systems throughout the city of Philadelphia. We are facing very difficult times and facing multiple layers of trauma. That is why we message that it is okay if you are not okay. That is why we message that you are not alone and that help is available. We encourage anyone in need of support to reach out to member services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 888-545-2600. DBH-IDS has a resource toolkit now available, specifically designed to help people understand the signs and symptoms of trauma and learn how to connect to available resources. As part of DBH-IDS's newly launched Boost Your Mood campaign, you can now find this trauma information, including tips and resources for children, families, and communities by visiting dbhids.org/boost. This additional information will be shared with Council with our request to help with dissemination to support increased awareness of the tools and resources available throughout the DBH-IDS full continuum of care. Exposure to adverse childhood experiences and prolonged trauma can negatively affect people's life trajectories. Together, we can work to reduce these traumatic events and their impacts so that Philadelphians affected by trauma can get their life trajectories back on track. Thank you to all the members of City Council for holding hearings on this very important issue. We hope that the viewing public will be encouraged to connect to support as a result of this platform. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Ms. Hughes, Dr. Williams, and I are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jill. Next witness, just state your name for the record and begin.
Good morning. My name is...
Good morning, Karen.
Good morning. How are you?
Pretty good.
Great. Good morning, members of the City Council, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and join in a conversation regarding this most important topic. I am Karen Lynch.
Karen, I think there's some background. There's some background noise.
Is there background noise now? No, is it better?
It's better. Yeah, you probably have to speak up just a little bit louder.
Okay. So I appreciate the thumbs up because that is encouraging and it gives me a sense of what more is needed. Thank you, Councilmember Kim, and thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Again, my name is Karen Lynch, and I am the Chief of Student Support Services with the School District of Philadelphia. I'm here today representing Dr. William Haidt, who is our superintendent, and also the school district. I am also joined by several of my colleagues. After I speak, Dr. Tanya Wolford is going to share with you information about data that as a community we have collected with other city agencies. We've joined this information. We've gathered this information so that you can get a sense of where students are attending who have experienced gun violence, to which schools they are attending. The topic that we have today, gun violence, is a very important topic. It's important to discuss this and to discuss this as a community because each of the members of our community have a role in playing in order to ensure the end of gun violence that's taking so many lives of our young children. The loss of so many young lives to gun violence is a crisis. It's senseless. It's alarming. Each time we receive news of another child lost to gun violence, I think about the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, sisters, cousins, classmates, teachers, relatives. I think about the loss of the possibilities. No prom, no driver's license, no graduation, no workplace experience, college, marriage, children, grandchildren, all lost, a future lost. I think about the growing poverty of hope among our young people, and I wonder about a shooter and what it takes to reach this level of violence and to take action that ends another's life. I pray for the survivors that they may somehow find a way to move forward despite the loss and given the loss of their child. This is a crisis that our city is experiencing. The school district is an active part of the city, and we play an important role in collaborating with others to help solve this crisis. We are eager and willing to sit at the table, to gather in forums, to go wherever needed to involve the school district in our role as part of our responsibility toward educating and providing safety and shelter for young people. While we are eager, willing, and more than able to join the effort, we cannot lead this effort. And so we turn to other agencies within our community in order to ensure that we are part of their effort. I'm extremely pleased that I had the opportunity this morning to speak after Dr. Jill Bowen. Her agency provides a good deal of resources within the community, both mental health and behavioral health, as she described. And following Councilmember Gim's instructions, I am not going to repeat all of what she said, and I'm not going to speak to, although it's all in my comments, I am not going to speak to the many, many resources to which the school district is partnering with CDH and DBIDS on providing both trauma, mental health, and behavioral health supports. Today, I'm going to share the School District of Philadelphia's protocol when there is a crisis. I'm going to talk a little bit about the skills that we are teaching students to help them learn and control their emotions and their conflict and their behavior. And then I'm going to talk very, very briefly about next steps. And as I said, following me is my colleague, Tanya Wolford, who's going to share data. So first, what does the school district do when there is a serious incident involving a young person, a student, a child within our school district? We have provided the council members with a flow chart that describes exactly what we do when we engage. Recognizing that not every situation is the same and not every incident is the same. We differentiate our services depending on the severity of the crisis. So going to the next slide, thank you. The prevention and intervention liaisons in the School District of Philadelphia support every single one of our schools. They have an assignment. They are very, very familiar with the schools. They become involved and engaged in the schools when there's not a crisis, so that they are most prepared when there is a crisis to engage. I'm not going to read the slide word for word, but you can see that these are the mental health experts within our school district who are most prepared to address the needs of trauma, behavioral health, and to coordinate the services that students, staff, and members of the community need, the school community need, in order to address emergencies, crises, and provide intervention, and as well coordinate services across the city, including those services that are provided by Dr. Bowen's agency, CDH, as well as DBIHS. In the flow chart, you will see that the very first thing that occurs is that agencies provide us with information regarding an incident. It's also very possible that we hear first from family members, staff, and individuals in the community who are first People is absolutely critical, and I would say it is the essence of the frameworks that we have within the School District of Philadelphia. When we talk about relationship building, we think about relationship first, restorative practices, we think about PBIS, and other frameworks that are all intended to help young people build relationships, bridge what they thought to be differences, and recognize that there's greater commonality than they know, and also to help them find reliable, trusting individuals within the school, both among their peers and among the adults that they can reach out to in crisis, and that they are forming relationships with when there's not a crisis, so that they are building a skill that they can carry with them throughout life. I want to absolutely highlight that one of the things that we have been doing most recently in our conversations with Council Member Gilmore Richardson is highlighting the importance of finding ways, identifying ways, and continuing to grow the ways in which youth can address their conflict. We believe that it's extremely important that young people as well as adults learn how to resolve conflict when they see it with young people. And so if there's to be conflict resolution training, we would hope that there are adults that also receive conflict resolution training, so that when they are engaging with you in resource centers, community locations, they too are prepared to help resolve the issues. Lastly, I just want to highlight several things that we're about doing next. I've shared very often in these comments how we will continue to work with our city partners and our city agency and other city agencies. I've named several, and we will continue that work. We're going to work together with these agencies, but as I said, it's probably not that we can lead the effort, but gun violence is extremely important to everyone, and we have to be a part as we particularly look at the frequency in which young Black boys and young Black men are dying at an alarming rate within our city. We're going to work with Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, who's extremely passionate on this topic and who we appreciate for reaching out to us to join in her efforts. We are also going to continue to identify supports that are needed and grow those supports as we have over the last 10 years. And we also believe that the opening of schools is going to be extremely important, because young people need to be in safe, sheltering environments for the majority of their day, so that they can avoid the instances that can lead to gun violence, and they can be in a protected and sheltered environment. Along with other child-serving agencies, we have to find ways to better support children who have been involved in gun violence. Our evidence shows that homicide reviews of those children that we have lost shows that at some point, many have been involved in an instance of gun violence. And if we engage these children before a homicide occurs, engage them with supports, including mentoring and ways to deal with their anger and ways to deal with their emotions and become more in tune with their emotions, it's a city effort. Ours, again, is one of instruction. We're teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so to be able to provide all of these additional supports, we have to rely on members of the community who are going to engage with children in their individual organizations. So in closing, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to comment. And next, as I shared, we are going to hear from my colleague with the school district, Dr. Tanya Wolford, who is sharing information on data that is available to us as a community. Thank you.
You're welcome, Dr. Lynch. Is Dr. Wolford available? Next.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you, Tanya.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Tanya Wolford. I'm Chief for Evaluation, Research, and Accountability, and I'm going to present some information on shooting victims enrollment in the Philadelphia public school system today. The Philadelphia Police Department provides us directly through our Office of School Safety with identifying information on school-age shooting victims. And that, to this point, has been victims that are between the ages of 6 and 22. The data that I'm going to present today represents shooting incidents and victims, incidents that took place between January 1, 2020 and April 3, 2021. SDP was able to match 753 of these victims to actual enrollment records within the district. And of these 753 victims, 280, or roughly 37%, had an active enrollment at the time of the incident. 473, or 63%, were not enrolled. Those who had exited included students who had graduated, for instance, dropped out, or students who had transferred out of the SDP system. And I'll go into more details on this in the table, the slide. I'll walk you through this in just one sec. I did just want to clarify also that the victims were enrolled in Philadelphia Public Schools for multiple years. So the figures presented here represent the school of last record for the students, or the last school of record. And the last school of record that we have, it's going to include traditional SDP schools, alternative schools, charter schools, as well as approved private schools for special ed placements. This data slide provides an overview of the information that we have from students or school-aged students that were enrolled in the district that were involved in a shooting incident. And so on this slide, which we'll walk you through different sections of, but just to give an overview, it's got information on the overall victims, which was that 753 number that I pointed out, the enrolled victims, which is the 280 number that I pointed out, or 37%, as well as information on the exited students, the 473, or 63% of students that have been involved in an incident for which we have records. This slide also intersects the data across those different groups with information on types of schools they were enrolled in, the last record that we have for those students, as I just previously described. Next slide, please. Can you go back to the back one, please? Thank you. So the first section with the orange box around it is the total number of students and what percentage of those victims or students involved in incidents were enrolled in the different sectors. So just walking through this is the total for the victims involved in an incident that we were able to match. 267 were in SDP K-12 schools, 290 in alternative schools, 187 in charter schools, and 9 in those approved private school placements. In terms of the type of schools, I will just clarify. So the alternative schools typically are involving children that are older, and the SDP and charter schools, here the larger numbers are in high schools. So over 80% of the students that were identified were ages 17 to 22. So over 80% of the students in that category were ages 17 to 22. Next slide, please. So the second part of this graph is then looking at these other two breakdowns of active students and exited students, which that 280 plus 473 equals the total students that I just referred to. But if we're looking at active and exited students for all of the sectors and all of the categories, you can see that the numbers of exited students are higher. And again, that does just mean that last school of record that we have on file for the student occurred before the incident was recorded, before the date of the incident. And as you'll see here, these percentages are out of the total. So out of the 753 students, we would say that 26.8% were exited students from an alternative school as their last school of record. Similarly, we can look over and say 20.8% of that 753 were students that had a last school of record as one of SDP's K-12 schools. And then this just provides further details around that distribution. Next slide, please. Lastly, this slide, can you see the bottom of the slide? Because I can't see it. Okay, thank you. Lastly, this slide provides last enrolled record by school. And these are schools with the top number of students overall that were involved in incidents. And it's 25 schools that represent over 50% of the enrollments for the victims. So stated otherwise, over 50% of the victims had a last school of record as one of the 25 schools shown here. And again, we provide the breakdown between total number of students that were enrolled at some point, as well as active students in the different schools. The legend at the bottom, just to highlight, you can also then see blue schools are district schools. The cream, yellowy color, orangish color are alternative schools, and then the green is charter schools as well. And that is my presentation on the distribution of enrollments. I'd be happy to take any questions. I'll say in advance if I'm not able to provide you, if there are additional data questions, I will be able to follow up. We'll be able to take those questions and follow up on pulling or finding the data that you may be interested in that's not here.
Councilmember Johnson, present.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. I want to acknowledge Councilwoman Maria Kiona Sanchez, who has a question.
Thank you, Member Johnson. And I want to thank you and Councilmember Gim for bringing such a timely conversation in this. I just thought it was really important, and if Jill can speak to this really quickly, the kind of work that's been done over the last few years around behavioral health in the school district is unlike anything we've done before. And unfortunately, COVID hit us in the middle of us institutionalizing some of the work that's been done. I think it's important, and Jill, if you don't have the specifics, but then if you could provide it for the record in this particular hearing, I think it would be critical. The selection of which behavioral health agencies and their alignment with school-based providers, and the amount of investment both from your behavioral department to the school district. I think it's important as we talk about amplifying and growing this, because I think the conversation is about how we do this better and what more supports we need. I think it's important for us to know what investments are currently on a school-by-school basis. There are clearly some neighborhoods that require more than others, and I think part of what we're trying to get to is align where we have hotspots and align that with the school district's plans for summer opening and some additional information. So if you don't have that readily available, but if you could speak to the intensity of the investment that you're making on the school-by-school basis, I think it's important for the record. Thank you, and thank you again.
Thank you, Council Member. I don't have those specifics in front of me, but we certainly can get them. And I do have Dr. Williams on the phone, on the call, and she may be able to say some more. But I do want to say it's 27 providers across all of the schools. And the idea of having this available for in every school is really a critical component. And it both provides the opportunity for the evidence-based practice to be available that is known to mitigate against the traumatic effects of ACEs. That's cognitive behavioral treatment. And though the pandemic slowed down some of the training initiatives, the foundational CBT training continued even through this past year of the pandemic. In addition, there is work that is done with the school and with the teachers in the classroom that helps to address challenging behaviors or challenging conflicts. So conflict resolution, et cetera, that can happen in the classroom or can happen in terms of skill building for teachers and to help with some of the interactions in the classroom. So it's a enormous undertaking and wide-reaching, and that we are just beginning to even see the impact that this approach can have on the children in the schools. I do want to see if Dr. Williams would like to say some more. She is the Children's Services lead at Community Behavioral Health and is very actively working with the school district on the Intensive Behavioral Health Services, the IBHS program. So I'll see if Dr. Williams would like to say a few words in response to council member question.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Bowen. We really are very excited about some of the opportunities that we have with IBHS, or Intensive Behavioral Health Services. We took a different approach to implementing behavioral health services that are available in schools by offering a regionalized approach. It's a strategy that we've used with other types of behavioral health services, but essentially providers are sort of assigned to particular zip codes where schools are located, and they're considered the lead behavioral health agency for those schools. So principals have a go-to lead mental health agency that they can contact when they believe that a student is having some behavioral health challenges. And so, in this way, we really wanted to also not just increase the communication between behavioral health providers and schools, but also to be able to increase the community links. So making sure that providers who are serving the communities and those zip codes are also communicating with other resources in those areas to provide really more holistic supports to students and families who need help.
If you can just give the information for the record, because I think as we move on, as this conversation carries on, and I definitely want to let Councilmember Johnson and Gim, who are hosting this and been working on this, I just want to make sure that because of COVID, some of the work that we initially thought was going to happen didn't happen, but I want to make sure that we're connecting this and evolving this to meet the really challenging immediate needs right now. So thank you very much. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just had one question regarding the liaisons that work with the school district. This is for Dr. Lynch. Just want to get an idea of the number of schools that are assigned per liaison, and then also what is their certification in terms of training and background regarding this work that they are doing.
Each has probably about 12 schools, 12 to 24 schools, depending on the network. And their backgrounds are in mental health. So they could have a counseling background, mental health, psychology background, and most are licensed clinical in trauma training.
Okay. And so that's 12 schools per liaison on their caseload?
It's 12 to 14, and it's based on the data and the experiences that are taking place within the school.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And that's it for you, Dr. Lynch. And I had a question for Dr. Jill Bolden regarding Network of Neighbors that I know my colleague, Councilwoman Kendra Brooks, works very closely with as well. And so, Dr. Bolden, I just want to get an idea. I remember doing a workshop with Network of Neighbors, and they were talking about how they go out into the community and provide trauma-informed training to community members who would like to participate. At that particular time, there was a staff of 2, and I know that the city of Philadelphia has other trauma-based services that they provide, but this particular organization, I know, do a lot of on-the-ground frontline work, right, regarding gun violence. I want to get an idea. So what's the future plan in turning expanding a level of services that are available, particularly with Network of Neighbors? Because when I had the workshop in Point Breeze, and I'm like, and I found that there was only 2 staff members, and I know we're on a trajectory at that time to hit 500 homicides. I was trying to really get an idea of how their work could be taken to scale in terms of really being out there and being effective. And again, I know when I talked to you, when you and I met, it was mentioned there are other services that the city of Philadelphia also provides, but my specific interest is Network of Neighbors, because I kind of do see them on the ground doing like the hard work in terms of training community members. So I just want to get some feedback from you.
So first I want to say thank you. It is a really excellent program, and I appreciate highlighting it. And therefore, the director of the program, Yolanda Hughes, is on here with me. And I will ask her to help explain the approach of the Network of Neighbors and why, a small group of leaders through DBHIDS can create a very wide group of leaders in the community. And so I will have her explain to you, she'd be the best, what the program is, which is not to say that we are not interested in expanding and have made that request for expanded funding for the program for this fiscal year 22 budget. And I do want to just say that we looked at some of the data on the number of communities that was served by Network of Neighbors. And so we compared the January through March 2020 quarter 1, which is the pre-pandemic quarter of 2020, with the current year quarter 1. 2021. So we're looking at January through March of 2020 versus January through March of 2021. And there's a over 65% increase in the number of communities served by Network of Neighbors. So you're talking about 29 communities served in the beginning of 2020 and 48 communities served the beginning of 2021. So we really do appreciate the attention and focus and understanding of the importance of this program. So I'm going to turn it over to Yolanda Hughes, the director for Network of Neighbors, who can be more explicit about the philosophy and the way in which the program works.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bowen. The Network of Neighbors has a very unique approach. And yes, currently there are 2 full-time staff to address your comment, Councilman Johnson. But the goal of the network is actually to train community members to support their own community. So when we go out to support communities, a couple things that happen. One, we operate from a premise called the ASK model, ASK, which really means that communities have to invite us in. And that's really important because when communities have been impacted by trauma, right, their sense of safety and trust has been taken away from them. So when we are asking communities to invite us in, that means they are driving the process. Their voice is leading the way. So we are getting a lot of information. We spend a lot of time with triaging and assessing communities. So pretty much what that means, we are working with communities to really establish their trust. Because as Councilwoman Gim spoke about when she talked about young people yesterday, we're asking young people and people in the community to tell their story about how something has impacted them. So if we don't have an invitation to come into that community, it will not make them feel safe, right? So that differentiates us from crisis response. So crisis response, they rush out and they support communities. But what we're really doing is building a relationship with communities that have been impacted to help them talk about how trauma is affecting them. And what I really love about the network is it's a gateway. It really exposes people to this is what it looks like to be in a safe space, to have a conversation, so that if I continue to have symptoms and things continue to escalate for me, then I will seek out more intensive behavioral health services if needed, right? So when we talk about training communities and the community members, what's really important is we feel that community members trust individuals in their own community. They're more likely to have that conversation. So we offer a training usually twice during the fiscal year where we train anyone who's interested to learn the interventions that we use. The intervention that we use is called post-traumatic stress management, and it's a group intervention. And we love this intervention because it has worked with different cultures, different neighborhoods. And the reason is because we are gathering people, which is natural for them to come together as a group from the same community to talk about how they have been impacted. Everything that we do is free, and we help communities organize as well. So, for example, if a community leader contacts us to say, yes, my group has been impacted by gun violence, I want to get youth together, things of that nature, we go the extra step in the sense of if you want us to help you create a flyer to pass out to the community, we will do that. But we want to make sure that the messaging comes from the community and it doesn't come from us. All right. So it's always about the community driving the process.
Great. Thank you for that feedback. And again, I'm glad you clarified the difference between the work that you do in crisis response teams. That was very, very helpful. And I'm just interested, but most importantly, just inspired by your work, because separate from the crisis response is the actual deep dive perspective of actually just dealing with trauma that individuals experience as it relates to the gun violence that we're seeing, but also the community. Because I think sometimes we forget that not only when there's a shooting or a murder inside a neighborhood, not just the immediate family members are impacted, but the community is impacted, because a lot of times there are our loved ones and friends and people we watch growing up in our neighborhoods whose lives are taken. And so thank you very much. At this time, I'm going to call on Councilwoman Helen Gim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate it. I wanted just to very briefly talk about a few, just as we go into this conversation, some comments that were made by young people last night, because none of this is intentional for us, but it's important to hear how they are seeing things. So one of the things that they talked about is when you punish violence, when you look at violence and punish it, one of the things that was drawn out is that you punish depression, and they're feeling that anger is very closely linked to depression. What they said was you need to invest in our humanity. You need to invest in places where we can get help that isn't a lockdown facility. You need to invest in the therapy that comes out of relationships that reflects culture and lived experiences. And I think that this is a little bit of what Councilmember Quinona Sanchez was talking about. And that one of the young people said, you have to look at the why young people are doing things. The grieving process is long-term, but understanding this why is going to fix a lot of things. So I hope that everybody can stay on to listen to some of the testimony that you're going to hear later, especially from school principals, because it's incredibly powerful. And to Karen Lynch in particular, you and I have been on the phone for a long time. We've talked about things after the immediacy. I know this is like deeply personal and deeply personally felt. And I know you understand like what your principals are going through each and every day. But it's very clear that when we're hearing the testimony from principals, we also did a survey of, people online, including a lot of teachers who talked about what it's like to scan the news, and go through all of this. And read and pray that your students or former students aren't on that list. But I think one of the things that comes out the most is the feeling, and from both young people and from educators on the ground, that they need more in their school on a regular and daily basis. And that, they're talking about the social workers, trauma specialists, counselors, assistant principals, some service days, for teachers and staff so they can help deal with some of the aftermath. And so I guess one of the questions for Karen Lynch and for the school district is, what are we doing to increase these resources at the school level, knowing that the relationships are what matters, not so much the service that's provided, but the service is delivered through the vehicle of a relationship. That's how it continues. That's how it kind of gets going. And maybe that's how, it may ultimately be transferred off. But young people don't feel like they can access these services unless they're like basically committed to them, or they're just, if they're assigned, maybe they last or not. But, we've got these STEP teams. We've got 50 of them. What can we do to expand and to really make a real shift in this time period with so many young people being impacted? I'm staggered by the numbers. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But just to get to those schools that are deeply impacted for trauma and violence. Now, if we can't do it at every school, can we make a commitment that every single one of the schools that showed up on that list will have a STEP team assigned to it?
Thank you, Council Member. I think history is really important. And so just very quickly, I would share that 10 years ago, when the superintendent arrived, we had prevention and intervention liaisons. We did not have counselors in every school. We did not have school nurses in every school. And part of the reason was funding and the way that funding had been used to fund positions. And when money was lost, there wasn't an opportunity to be able to sustain those positions. It's one of the reasons why we have reached out to community partners who see children also within the community, like as I indicated, children and families, Jill's agency, and others that have the primary responsibility for providing these services. We also recognize that providing these services within our schools to help students have closer access is extremely important. So we've invited these partners to actually actively participate within our schools and become part of the school teams and augment the services and the relationship building that we have. I think Jill and the two colleagues that she mentioned are about the process of working with providers who are constant, not coming and going within our schools, so that they do have the opportunity to build relationships and bring services. But in addition to all of that, I want to highlight that in the last few years, we've, and you pointed this out, through the STEP program, we have hired, and again, this is another program that CBH is paying for. The individuals are in fact district employees, and the support team for educational partnerships is actually one where, while it does not exist in every school, we have, based on the data, placed these resources in more than the 21 schools that we originally started with. So schools, based on their data and based on their school improvement plans and what they plan to address moving forward, do have some of the support teams in them. And moving forward, I know factually that you're absolutely right. We are looking for ways to ensure. So several of our schools have said we'd like to have more social workers, or we'd like to have a social worker, or we'd like to have counselors. So to put the same resources in every single school is not something that is not the direction that I think we're moving in, but the direction of addressing the needs of the students that are within the schools is the direction that we're moving in. STEP is intended to be a tier 2 support, and very, very frequently students need a tier 3 support, and it's not intended for that purpose. IDHS is probably closer to that effort. And so, I wouldn't make a blanket statement about STEP going into every school as much as I would say that where there is a high need, resources have to be provided. And that's what we have been doing over the last 10 years and what we're going to continue to do moving forward.
So your data showed that 50% of shooting victims can be found in about 25 schools.
Yeah.
Between charter, district, alternative, and special assignment schools. What are those schools getting specifically? I mean, we could even go through there 25 schools. We can look at 50% of the shooting victims in a 16-month period, which, again, just shocking, right? 753 young people, and it's a shocking number in general. But if 50% of them are in just 25 schools, tell me what those 25 schools are getting. Will they have? Does every single one of them? Minus, I know some of these are charter, but for the district schools, does every single one of them have a STEP team?
No, but every single one of them has IBHS, and that's intensive behavioral health services. Every single one of them has that. Okay. And again, I would
have prevention and intervention liaisons allocated to all of them, and that includes the alternative schools.
The alternative schools have a prevention and intervention liaison that is assigned to the alternative schools. The alternative schools, I will highlight, are not, they're contracted, and so all of the services that might be available, some services come through contracts. So they might have social workers or additional staff that are provided, not necessarily directly from the school district, but through the contract and the contracted services that the contracted entity has determined to provide. The services that we're talking about are not services that are available in charter schools. But right. Every single one of the school district schools has intensive behavioral health services available to them. And as I shared, each of the prevention and intervention liaisons has a complement of schools that they work with.
So, but are you saying there's only one prevention and intervention liaison amongst the school district schools that are on there?
No, I'm saying that there is, that each prevention and intervention liaison has a group of schools that they work with.
So among the 25, I guess one question is part of what the data should show us is an ability to understand how to allocate some of these supports. And what I part of it is I understand that the prevention and intervention liaisons are assigned to schools, but there's only one prevention and intervention liaison assigned to the alternative schools. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Even though there are multiple alternative schools on this list of schools that encompass a huge portion of young people impacted by violence.
Yes, but that's not the only support that they are receiving.
No, I understand. It sounds like, though, that the prevention and intervention liaison has a very specific role to play around convening all those actors, yes. Right? And I guess if you're looking at a school like MLK or at or at an Overbrook, I'm blanking on some of the other schools that are on the list that I recall from there, or at Lincoln, it almost feels like you would want to ensure, knowing that there's been such a deep impact over a really short period of time. I mean, you're talking about 16 months, that there might be something more intensive that's going on there. And are you looking at at this, or what can we tell some of the schools, knowing, I mean, the data is very clear. How are we using this to ensure that they have more resources coming in right now?
So looking at, let's just take the alternative schools as an example. We recognize that prevention and intervention liaisons have a great role and responsibility, and as more has happened in those schools, looking at the data, increasing the numbers of prevention and intervention liaisons that are serving those schools is important. If you look at the transitional services that we have available, you'll consider schools that are on the list like Overbrook and MLK. When students are transitioning from detention centers, when students are transitioning from behavioral health, we recognize that more case management service is necessary in order to ensure that transition. And so we have increased the numbers of case managers. I think we shared that with you. That came as a result of the RTF discussions that we had. So we've increased that number, and they're going to focus on those schools like MLK and Overbrook that have the greatest number of transitioning students coming and going. And so we're in the process of hiring those individuals right now. So yes, you're absolutely right. Looking at the data and providing resources and providing them as quickly as necessary is important. When the resource isn't readily available to us, being able to reach out to our community partners and say, here's where additional services need to be provided in a particular school is absolutely critical.
Okay, so I want to make sure that there's some time here for other things, but I do want to follow up. For
go ahead, Madam Chair.
With you, yeah.
I would defer because you are co-chair of this hearing. Go ahead. Latitude is extended. Go ahead.
Understood. I'll make it quick. I guess one of the questions that I have is for these schools in particular, that I understand the importance of case managers. We have gone through this before, though. Like, we have seen millions of dollars invested into a school wrapped around individual students. And one of the benefits of the STEP program and of, kind of looking at schools within a holistic environment is that, the impact of violence is not just on the one individual child or, their immediate family. It is on a broader school community. And one of the things that we're most concerned about, especially around prevention and intervention, is that you don't want things to continue to expand and spread. That young people who have many young people around them impacted by shootings in particular, by gun violence, can be deeply impacted by that. So the question still remains that the school community needs the help. In addition to the young person in the schools, it's not just that the young person goes to school to receive those services. It's that we're creating a community around young people that is better equipped to help them deal with broader issues and their immediate networks of individuals or other young people that they interact with. So I'm gonna hold on that for a minute because I want to press on that because I think that's really important. But I'm not going to do it right now. I'm going to shift over to asking Dr. Bowen. One of the complaints that we hear over and over and over again are that there are very long wait times to access IBHS services. Do you have an understanding of what a general wait time might be?
I don't, but Dr. Williams might. And I think you're talking about during the pandemic that there has been a wait time. Is that what you have heard?
IBHS has only come up during the pandemic, right?
Right. So you're hearing about it. Yeah.
Okay. So a counselor of STEP says that a child desperately needs IBHS. They get referred, we are we know how this works with young people, right? Like time, this is not like our usual, let me put you on the agenda. Time is like humanity for them.
Yeah, critically important.
When you're 14 years old, right?
Yeah.
So, like not responding means you don't care, even if it's not like intentional or anything like that. But what we hear over and over again is we hear a lot of anecdotes. We don't actually know the scope. And so I guess one question would be whether you have a sense of the wait times.
Yeah, let's get that answer from Dr. Williams. And I completely understand how a wait would be interpreted that way by the youth and also by the families who
we hear could be weeks, for example.
Yep.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. One of, the issue around wait times, I think, was more problematic under BHRS, which, as we know, was changed to IBHS through state regulations. And as part of the regulations, they were changed actually to address access. And so the new regulations really removed a lot of the old barriers that were in existence that created challenges to access to BHRS. So those have been removed. And I would also say that because in Philadelphia, we have the regionalized model, referrals and access to IBHS should be almost immediate because every student is assigned to an IBHS provider. So there is no wait. And we, to date, have not received any complaints related to access or waits for IBHS.
Okay. Well, why could we, one thing that would be helpful, and I'll make this of the chair, if you could maybe come back to us with like comprehensive data, so we're not doing it just driven by complaints, and I'm not doing it just driven by anecdotes. It's definitely not what we're hearing. We're hearing a more consistent concern about wait times and referrals and access. So I may not doubt that a child may be referred to a provider. I'm just saying by the time the provider gets to the child, it may be a very long time. And I guess I'm wondering if part of IBHS can be collecting data on wait times, and ask if maybe you could come back to the chair or to the committee with a little bit more information about that would be helpful. And then I think I'll just close out here by just saying, 50% of the shootings in the last 6 months has involved a young person at 25 schools, whether they are charter, whether they are alternative schools, whether they're under district control or not. We have to drive resources to those schools. We have to figure out how to engage the school communities, the young people, and be listening in particular to the school leadership, principals, educators, parents, and school staff, as well as young people. I think that this is a very important issue. It's not just, data isn't there just for us to like kind of look at it and marvel. It's actually there for us to it should help us either ask more questions or redirect resources. Right now, the principals and the educators and the students at those schools tell us they do not have the resources that they need to handle their current population on top of the gun violence that they're dealing with right now. We need to get them the help that they need. We'll try to make this a more central aspect of our work. But Mr. Chair, I'll cede my time for other council.
Madam Chair, I want to do two things because I see we have Councilman Brooks waiting next, but I want to be quick and have two particular things addressed. Karen, you can respond because I see you have your hand up, but also, Madam Chair, you talked about pressing before you pivoted and talked to IBHS, and so on a particular topic. Did you get to your point regarding with Karen? And Karen, you can go ahead and respond.
Thank you. So I think that the councilwoman asked in which of the schools that are on the list is there STEP services, and I'm provided with information, and I want to share that. So King has a STEP team at present. Bartram has a STEP team at present. Overbrook has a STEP team at present. Frankfurt has a STEP team at present. Edison has a STEP team at present. West Philadelphia has a STEP team at present. Dobbins has a STEP team at present. Lincoln has a STEP team, and South Philadelphia High School also has a STEP team. In addition, each of these schools has counselors. I think the only school district school that's on this list that doesn't have a STEP team is Ben Franklin, and the resources in addition that we're providing for that school, that's the school that we're looking to see the additional resources, and whether or not a STEP team or some other service we need. But there are other services that are available at each of these schools. So before you close the record, I wanted to be able to share that information because I believe that was what you were asking.
Yes. Thank you.
Madam Chair, did you press?
There will be continued efforts, Council.
Just want to make sure I'm extending the time that you want to get your point across regarding this particular topic. I do want to go back, Madam Chair. You talked about with IBHS the wait time, and so can Tamara please come back on the screen?
Hi.
Hey, Tamara. Just give me an idea of the staffing level, because if Madam Chair is saying from her perspective, she's hearing that there's a significant wait, what is the staffing ratio in terms of staffing level there and response time to providing services?
Yeah, sure. So for the IBHS providers, they're required to have certain types of staff as well as a certain number of staff to be able to accommodate any referrals to their agencies for IBHS. And those include clinical staff as well as case management staff, and some of the providers also have peer supports. I will say that some of the providers during the pandemic have reported experiencing some difficulties hiring just because of as a result of COVID and people not being available because of illness. But outside of that, they have reported that they are able to meet the staffing requirements as they're expected to based on the IBHS regulations.
Okay, and when you talk about COVID having an impact on staffing level, have you seen a significant decrease in services provided just based upon the impact of COVID, and what's the plans, I guess, increase as we come out of this pandemic, hopefully?
Yeah, and I think, what we're seeing in Philadelphia is very much what others are seeing across the nation, that, for certain types of treatments and services, that there has been a decrease in utilization. We think that once things sort of quote unquote return to normal, that we will see those levels readjust to pre-COVID. And so that's our expectation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. Councilwoman Kendra Brooks.
Thank you so much, Councilman Johnson.
Thank you for your patience.
Well, no problem. I have a lot of emotions on this particular issue right now, so I'm going to start off there. And I just want to kind of ground it with the conversation from last night with one of the young persons. And my question to him is, if he had access to services before he was incarcerated that led him to be able to do work now around trauma-informed intervention and mediation, would he have been incarcerated? He paused and really thought about it. And that pause meant a lot to me because he said a lot of things. The final answer was, nah, he probably wouldn't have took that path if he had it. And the reason I brought that up, because Ms. Lynch, you mentioned about 10 years ago and, the disinvestments around the school district and all the services being removed. And if we do the math, that means 10 years ago, that disinvestment is the same population of young men that are dying on the street. And when I went to visit the prison last Thursday, it was the same age group, 18 to 24, that are filling our prison systems. And then you also added about the number of schools that are receiving STEP services and intervention, and they're all high schools. Even though I understand that a large number of the folks that are involved in that are coming from high schools. What are the investments into young people? I'm talking about the feeder schools that feed into these high schools, because the majority, when I looked on that list, I live in 19140 zip code. Every school, charter and public, should have behavioral health services, trauma informed, and all of these things in 19140 zip code. And the reason I'm so emotional, because I say constantly, my kids have buried more friends in their lifetime than I could ever understand. And listening to everyone that has something to do with disinvestment in young people 10 years ago, this blood is on your hands. And we need to make sure that we're investing in our babies. And I don't care how much it costs, because lives make a difference. The next generation of Black men are in prison or in the ground, and that's unacceptable. So I want to know what investment is needed to make sure we have these services starting in kindergarten. Bethune, Steele, Cleveland, all of these schools feed into Grants Mastery or Martin Luther King or Ben Franklin, whatever schools. What schools are we investing in? We need to invest in our babies immediately. We can't talk about data from 10 years ago when we're burying kids every day in our city. So I just need a clear understanding. What is the plan for the school district that every school in these zip codes? Another statistic, let me bring up, 11 zip codes have the largest mass incarceration in our city. All of those zip codes, we need investments, whether it's from DBIH, Department of Education, as well as Parks and Rec. It's all hands on deck. Our kids are dying. And I just don't hear that. I hear things being put together, but not with the sense of urgency that I see in the streets, that I saw in the prisons, and the trauma that my kids are experiencing. Because keep in mind, I have kids from ages 13 to 31. And when you put that math in my head, it immediately triggered why they're losing all their friends. And my heart goes out to the teachers, because the teachers are suffering as well. We talk about building community. Community means that everyone in the community gets the services that they need. And to Yolanda, I love you. She has showed up every time we've called her around trauma. But and I have an open door now that I worked with her before I was a council person. We need to do more of that. When we had a murder in my community, we called Yolanda. It took a week for the school district to open up a building for us to have a meeting. That's unacceptable. A week after a shooting, when people are traumatized immediately, we need to have some emergency response teams available. And emergency is 24 hours. We need to make sure these community-based organizations have access to our school buildings with not a whole bunch of red tape. I understand about liability and all of that, but if we want the services, we have to allow them to come into the building. And we have to make sound it like we have to invest in our babies, because we can't talk about 10 years from now. Because we're not going to see better if we don't do real prevention. And it can't be lip service. It has to be real. So I just need to hear from the school district. I need to hear from DBIH. I need to hear from these programs. What's the plan immediately? Statistics from 10 years don't mean anything right now. And I know this is a pandemic. A lot of things have changed, but we need this immediately. So I need an answer for like the next week of 80-degree weather, because that's what I heard from the young people last night on that call. They're begging us for support. And they said they're sick of us meeting every week, every month, and not seeing any results. They're saying they need trauma informed. They're saying they have PTSD. What's the answer? What are we supposed to tell them? The system takes a long time? That's unacceptable when they're burying their friends. So I know that was loaded, but I need to hear something more than what I'm hearing right now, because it just really triggered me today.
So I will go first, and I will share a couple of things just to correct. One, I feel a deep sense of urgency to do something and make something happen. I feel a deep sense of urgency when I go into a prison and I see Black males in prison, and I know that those are my sons, those are my husbands, those are my children, those are my fathers. I recognize there's a sense of urgency. I speak with a sense of urgency. And if that hasn't been conveyed in this conversation, then please know that I think this is an urgent matter. When I see the children who are dying, they are young Black males that are dying. They're young Black males that are dying within our communities. So looking at me and knowing what I have produced, know that I have a sense of urgency, because these are my sons, these are my cousins, these are my nephews. This is our future. So I feel a sense of urgency that nobody can take from me as a Black woman. I feel it, I understand it, and I work towards it. The schools that I identified that have STEP were just the schools that were on the list of data that was showed by Tanya Wolford. Other schools throughout the district have STEP. Other elementary K through 8s have STEP programs. They have behavioral health supports. So I want to clarify that. My reference to 10 years ago was to show that from that time forward, we've done a tremendous job as a community, not just the school district of Philadelphia, but filling the need. We have more counselors in filling the need. We have more counselors in our schools. We have more nurses in our schools. Every single one of our schools has a nurse. And that nurse is part of the team that we're talking about, because that nurse is also providing trauma support. Those counselors are also providing trauma support. The behavioral health staff that we have is much larger today. School District of Philadelphia staff, much larger today than it was 10 years ago. So there is a sense of urgency, and that staff is growing. That's the other thing that I wanted to convey, and I'm still conveying in this conversation, that staff is growing. We didn't have social workers in our schools 10 years ago. We have social workers in our schools today. We didn't have behavioral health experts and clinical coordinators. We didn't even have a director of trauma support in our schools before developing a plan for trauma and teaching our teachers and teaching our school-based staff how to engage with children. There wasn't even awareness of trauma or an awareness of how to address the issues of trauma, or a recognition that very often the behaviors that you see in a child inside of the classroom have to do with that child experiencing trauma. It's not an effort on that child's part to behave poorly. It's an effort on this child's part to deal with their own trauma and deal with their trauma in a way that a child deals with trauma. And very often that is acting out, and very often that is an experience that many of us look at. We say it's poor behavior, and we've taught our teachers, and we're continuing to teach our school-based staff that that is not the case, and that these children are experiencing trauma, have experienced trauma, and that post-traumatic stress and chronic trauma leads to behavior that need to be addressed. This is why we put standards into our schools through our PBIS efforts. This is why when we talk to kids, we talk and reinforce the positive behaviors that children have. And this is why building relationships is extremely important, because children need to know who they can trust, who they can confide in, and where they can go for resources. And in our K-8, this is something we're engaging with all the time, including services that say to students, how do you feel today? What's going on with you today? And we're infusing all of that into the curriculum, and it's absolutely important for people to know how they feel, and for young children to know how they address the problems that they have, how do they address the crisis that they have, and how do they express their emotions, and how do they say, I'm not having a great day and I need help. And so the things that you talked about, absolutely important. The fact that we've been doing this for the better part, growing these services for the better part of the last 10 years, I think it's important for you to know. The last thing that I will say to address the comments that you offered is you asked what is in every single school and what can you count on. I would say IBHS is in every single school. That didn't exist more than a year ago. IBHS is a way to train our teachers. It's a way to have a staff person from the IBHS provider who's inside the classroom looking at the behaviors of students and recognizing when a student has experienced trauma and engaging the teacher or the person who's in the classroom with providing services and supports and understanding and recognizing what that behavior is and how to adjust the behavior and how to encourage the child to adjust the behavior, and also to carry that service and that strategy into the home by engaging parents and knowing exactly what it is that will help their child to have a much better experience to deal with their trauma, exposing parents to what trauma actually is and how to address the needs of students. So we're training school-based staff through IBHS. We're engaging on a one-to-one with children with IBHS. And IBHS is also the service that can provide the one-to-one supports that you previously saw that were provided through STS to students that have the need to have a one-to-one support within the school. So that is just a few of the things that the service is intended to do. It's intended, as I said earlier, to be culturally responsive. It's intended to be able to continue the supports, not just in the school, but in the community and in the home, so that children aren't and families aren't engaging with different providers, and you can see a building of the skills and the information and knowledge that's essential. This is all part of what's available today. This is part of what the community is building today that did not exist years ago, and each year we build on the service that we have. And I think it's really important.
Karen?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, excuse me, Karen. I don't mean to interrupt. There was a call for a point of clarification by Councilwoman Helen Gim.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that, and to Councilmember Brooks's point, I think what I'm certainly talking about, and I think what I heard from Councilmember Brooks a little bit, is there's no question that our young people need mental health supports all across the board. Every single school should be entitled to it. We've got 25 schools where 50% of the shootings are happening to those children. And then those schools also have feeder schools that go into them. We need a clearer plan for young people who are, and schools that are directly and overly impacted by violence, that is over and above what the district is doing. We full-heartedly support it, whether it's IBHS or STEP. We want that. We want to make that clear. But the question today on the table, we are having this hearing because thousands of young people have been shot. You have the data. You are feeling the pain. And the schools that are experiencing the most, the JJSC, Martin Luther King, Overbrook, Lincoln, and their feeder schools. Tell us what additional they are getting. How are we getting into those schools? And it's not just you. It's not just you. It's also DBH, and darn sure DHS is going to be here on this conversation as well. But we need something over and above what every other child needs and deserves. And that's what we're not hearing right now. We need to know for these schools, tell us how we're helping them end cycles of violence and deal with the trauma that they're facing right now.
They're getting we're increasing the numbers of prevention and intervention liaisons, as I said. We are increasing the numbers of caseworkers to do specifically to do transition services, as I said. We are increasing the number of we're increasing the social work supports. In fact, that's in my budget request for this year to schools, so that the schools that need it are going to receive the social service supports. We have made the request to increase the services and the review of those residential treatment facilities and children that are transitioning back from detention, so that we can better prepare them for the transition, but more importantly, so that we can look at the education that they are receiving in these locations. This is just a few of the things that we are doing specifically to those schools that have the greatest need. In addition, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In addition, I also point out that these schools and their school improvement plans have requested and received additional positions that I'm not readily prepared to speak to today, but it's all part of their plan for increasing and improving the climate, the culture, and education within their schools. So several have asked for additional counselors. Some have asked for behavioral health supports in addition to what they have.
Councilwoman Brooks?
Just for clarity, so if with all the data that you have gathered, is there an ideal pattern of supports that are needed in these schools that can be implemented in the 25 schools and their feeder schools as a way of prevention and to halt what's happening now. At the meet, I don't know which gun violence meeting I've been on, but we keep talking about all hands on deck. And to me, all hands on deck meaning having a systemic plan that accomplishes this across schools, across the district. And I just need to hear. So like some principals ask for this, some principals ask for that. Have we identified the right mixture for this to be right? Does this also include smaller class sizes? Does it also, I need to hear like what all is included, because I worked in school budgets before and I know that the principal has full autonomy to pick and choose a menu of options when it comes to these services. Is there a menu of options? Is there funding available for a principal to have multiple resources in their school? So if they want to do PBIS and they want to do restorative practice and they want to do trauma informed, and if they wanted to do conflict resolution or whatever, can they get all four? Or you have this pot of money and you only can pick two? So for me, all hands on deck means that they have all four in their schools ready to roll out next week. Or as soon as we can hire folks up. It doesn't mean, this is a lot of money that you're getting and that's it. So that's what I'm trying to hear. I need to hear what this path looks like, because that's not what I'm hearing. And I don't know, maybe some of my council members might be hearing something different, but I don't hear that the all hands on deck that we're talking about with clergy, community-based organizations and communities. I don't hear the all hands on deck approach in what you're saying from the school district, starting with the feeder schools. Because keep in mind, if your brother is 17 and he's murdered on the street by one of your classmates' brother, who is also 17, who's in jail now, and then you're back in school or on Zoom calls right now together, that's trauma. Are we addressing it from that lens? Because and that's exactly how it happens. That's what I need to hear. And I don't know if you guys have prepared it that way, but I just, yeah, I just need to hear more clarity as to what exactly this program looks like.
Services that we offer that I've described related to crisis and crisis response would address what happens when students are in feeder schools and the services that have to be provided within the feeder schools. But that aside, every single one of our schools engages in a school improvement plan process. That process includes annually looking at the data that exists in the school, and I'm talking about all the data, both the academic data as well as the climate data, where incidents occur within the school, what the suspensions look like, what are the students in the school that have trauma issues, what are the behavioral health reports within the school. It's a variety of data elements that exist every single year. We look at this and we sit down. There are evidence-based programs that the state has identified. We look at the data, we meet with the schools, we match the data with the evidence-based programs to see what's going to be available within the school. Several of our schools have selected PBIS. It's a service that's provided centrally. School signs up for PBIS based on their data and based on what it is that we recognize collectively that needs to be achieved in the school. And that's the service that they receive. Restorative practices, youth court, all of these services, and it's timely because we're constantly looking at this data and we're constantly looking at what needs to happen within the school to move forward. The staff services that you see in the majority of schools that I just mentioned that are on this list are services that were received through that process. We moved STEP into the schools because we looked at the data. We saw what was taking place with young people, and we put STEP into those schools. We said to the school leaders, this is what this service is for, and this is what this service is going to help provide. So that's what I mean when I say the plan that is serving the individuals within the school and is addressing the immediate needs. And these are services that are provided from the central office and coached and trained from the central office.
I have no other question.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kendra Brooks. I'm going to ask for, I know he said he deferred, but I'm still going to give him an opportunity in case he wants to. Isaiah Thomas. I just had a quick question because Councilwoman Brooks talked about it. I know we had a preliminary conversation about the services that are provided to the district schools versus charter schools, right? And from the statistic that I just recently saw, you have a significant population of young people dying in alternative schools as well as charter schools, which constituents I represent as well. And so at some point in time, and it seems like we have two parallel tracks. Obviously, the school districts are focusing on school district children, but I'm going to do a follow-up, Madam Chair, to look at a deeper dive with the head of the charter office to see what is the plan and how are they organizing around those charter schools, which still report to the Philadelphia School District. School Board at the end of the day, and the district, because the district makes the decisions of who stays open and who closes. But for me, I don't get into the nuances of that aspect. But for me, at the end of the day, they still just kids dying. That's all I see. If a kid go to prep charter school, got murdered, I remember he got murdered. His parents didn't call me and say, well, this is a district child. This woman just said, what are you doing to help my family? Bottom line, real simple. No different than when the kids got murdered outside Orton Reed High School, out in Grace Ferry and Tasker in my area. They didn't call me and say, is it a public school or a charter school? And so some way we got to figure this out separate from the oversight politics, because it's still children dying. And it seems like from the stats I saw today, right, I don't even know if there is a plan on a charter school or the special alternative school and even the special ed schools. Right, I have no idea what their plans are separate from the district, and so I'm gonna do a deeper dive, and we'll do a follow up in the future to come back to address that issue. Simply for the fact that these are just children dying here in the city of Philadelphia, and they warrant our support, regardless of where they go to school at. And it's incumbent upon us, because they are our constituents, to know what those plans are to make sure these children are being serviced and supported as they deal with this trauma. And so with that being said, I'm going to ask for Isaiah Thomas, Councilman.
Councilman Johnson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so thank you again for this conversation. I think, in the midst of listening to everything, I think what Councilmember Brooks was asking for, and I get all the things that's been done in the past, but just in the midst of listening to things, I think what she's saying is in these schools where we know that the young people have a higher likelihood of being involved in negative activity and having these gunshot situations take place. Like, what would it, and I'll come at it a different way. What would it cost for us to have more climate staff in every single one of those schools, right? So we're talking about NTAs. We're talking about people pushing those schools. Councilmember Brooks talked about teacher classroom sizes. What would it take to do that? What if we had extended day? What if we looked at changing their curriculum and having it mandatory for them to participate in maybe some type of mental health support, so it's not optional? Looking at possibly providing workshops for families and for other people who live in the community, maybe in 3-block radius, option maybe for dinner, extracurricular activities. These are just some examples of things that I would like to see specifically in the schools, right? Like, not in any other schools, but in the schools, whether they're public or charter, like Councilmember Johnson said, where we are showing the people in that neighborhood that they specifically are a priority, right? So if that's not in the works, because I do think that a lot of the measures that you talked about as far as casework and social work and things like that are important, right? But those are things that you need after something traumatic happens. One of the things that we talked about on the call last night was high school is returning back to school. What does that feel like and look like after being off for a year? Like, those are things that I think we are all worried about. And to be honest with you, Councilmember Johnson, the reason I just put like never mind in the questions is because what Councilmember Brooks is asking for, the basic answer is no. Like, the real answer is no, based on what I'm hearing. Like, no, we don't have anything special for these particular schools. And the things that I'm hearing are just general things that have been done that are actually bare necessities. All these things that I'm hearing are things that schools should already have in place. I think what we're asking for is a spark, something special in these particular schools. We have a plethora of money coming from the federal government, and 20% of those dollars that are coming to the school district must go to addressing this education gap. So we have the money to be able to do all the things that I just listed, plus a lot of other things. And those dollars are specifically earmarked to address these problems that we are facing because of the pandemic. And for us in Philadelphia, gun violence has been just as bad as the coronavirus crisis. So I don't have a question because clearly the answer is no. But I hope that that you hear the willingness from us to invest in your innovation. I think what we're frustrated with is the lack of innovation, specifically in the schools and in the communities that are suffering the most right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. We have to move on, but I do want to thank all our panelists for time out of this. This is the end of the discussion. It's the beginning of us trying to reset and address this issue proactively, because at the end of the day, we have to proactively make sure that we're addressing this issue as aggressively and making sure it's a priority. And most importantly, supporting our youth as best that we can. But I do thank all the panelists for taking time out of your schedule, and thank you for being here. Will the clerk please call the next panel? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Councilman Maria Kim Sanchez.
Yes, Council President. Again, I appreciate all the conversation. My initial question to Ms. Jill Bowman was specifically around the service providers and the intervention strategies, because we never saw the work of behavioral health being in isolation of the school district, right? And I think that we still don't see the connectivity between the services and the school district, which is why I think Councilmember Brooks is so frustrated, right? So Ms. Bowman or Ms. Williams, can you be more specific around the scope of services these behavioral health people are supposed to be providing for the schools? An incident happens. What does the provider do? What services do they provide to the child, right? And what recommendations do they make to school districts staff? I think that's what we're asking for. Something happened yesterday. Today the kids go to school. What happens?
Thank you.
I want to just do this just real quick. Can you summarize and be direct? Because I really do have to move on to the next panel. We've been here for 2 hours on one panel, and so I do want to get to the root of Councilman Sanchez's question, but also I have to move on, and so
summarize.
Yeah.
Summarize. Okay, I do want to say that Council Members Brooks' comments are very much along the line of the urgency, the triggering that is happening across the board. And I think that we need to convey that at DBHIDS, we are talking today about a few programs that are part of a comprehensive approach. There is a system, and you'll receive some of that material after the hearing, because it's really hard to get all of that out, but it is intentional. It is both responsive and also upstream. So what we're doing in the schools is one piece of an overall approach that includes upstream, preventive. So there's response to the trauma, there's prevention, and there is treatment. And so want to be able to convey that there is a tremendous amount of effort, even beyond the network of neighbors. There's a whole number of approaches that are working together to address prevention. When Council Member Gim spoke about mentorship, jobs, trusted adults, meaningful and safe spaces, housing stability, social isolation, internship programs, all of that is part of the overall package. And so when we talk about what's happening in the schools, this is a new and intensive approach that really hasn't had a chance to fully realize. And so we are absolutely looking forward to being able to spread the wings, I would say, of what is possible through IBHS which is more than connecting to treatment, but connecting to treatment is essential. So if you want to hear those specifics in response to Councilmember Sanchez, maybe Dr. Williams can, in a very brief, maybe 1 to 2 sentences, say more about the prevention efforts in the schools, the climate addressing, and along with the connection to the community and the parents and the home that are part of this effort that is centered in the school but goes beyond the school.
Yeah, sure. I can just take 1 minute. I do want to acknowledge that the school does offer trauma-informed training for their teachers, and that STEP also provides critical prevention and first-line supports. So IBHS is considered a Tier 3 treatment intervention for those who are showing significant clinical symptoms, but we know that kids start to demonstrate some behaviors that quite honestly often are mistaken as acting out behaviors, and the response is punitive. And so STEP is really there to sort of be the frontline support in sort of identifying those students. IBHS, however, offers a holistic approach. The providers are able to work with children and families in their homes, as well as in other community settings, as well as in the schools. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more that we could say in terms of prevention as well as treatment, but I want to respect the time.
I would say this as well. Dr. Jill, just provide for the chair, both chairs and members of the committee, an overview, right, of the prevention services that are provided, and also the partnership with the district in terms of services provided into which schools.
So for IBHS, it's in all of the schools. So it's in every school. And the connections to the classroom is through a program called, or an approach called Bridge, which allows the, and again, Dr. Williams could do this better than I can, but you're talking about a strategy in the classroom to help with managing challenging behaviors, in conflict resolution, the kinds of skill building for the adults, which, that help to create the kind of nurturing and supportive atmosphere that is helpful in preventing ACEs, right? So once someone's traumatized, then you have a different approach. So you have a preventive approach, and you have an approach that works to mitigate the impact of the trauma. And I can't stress enough the treasure that PACS is for the city of Philadelphia. The number of providers that have this skill set, this incredible evidence-based skill set specifically for the children of Philadelphia. And what's really important, especially in these times, is to elevate the connection that people know about the services that are available. What troubles me is that there is so much, and we still are working hard. The whole point behind Boost and the trauma-specific lane in Boost is to try and connect up for people that this is there, because there are folks who are not making those connections, and it's on us as well to work to find ways. And we seek your assistance too, and we work with the kids, and we do have Youth Move and other programs that work directly with the kids to help advise. But we have all of this and still need to help make those connections, elevate that.
If you and your team just could provide the services that are provided to the district in writing to both chairs, so we can distribute amongst members who may want additional information for follow-up. That would be very, very helpful. And for me, that would be in writing. This is our plan. This is exactly what we're doing to address your issues, and then we can also do a follow-up for feedback. But
appreciate that very much. Thank you, council members.
Thank you, Dr. Jill. Thank you for members of the district for being here on this call. And next, we're going to ask for the clerk to please call the next panel.
Aaliyah Bradley, Dr. John Rich, and Caroline Glavin.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Before we I had a very brief comment, and my hope will be that Thank you. Dr. Bowen and the school district, DBH, and anybody else who's on the city might continue to listen in on especially the testimony that comes afterwards. One of the things that is hopeful, if we feel like you have providers that meet requirements, our shift is to outcomes, honestly, that we're not just trying to match people together, but we're trying to understand whether the outcomes match the expectations that we have laid out for ourselves. And I think what you're going to hear is that we need staff on the ground. You can train as many people as you want, but if you don't have staff on the ground in the schools, it's really overwhelming. And I think you'll hear some gaps about what it is that principals and school staff may need. And I hope we can take it from a place of not being defensive, but continuing to evolve programs so that they actually get the outcomes that we say that we want for the young people. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the first pen, state your name for the record, begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. No, it is afternoon now. Good afternoon. My name is Aaliyah Katanji Bradley. I am the proud principal of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune Elementary School, where she is our anchor ancestor and encourages all to enter to learn, depart to serve. So I've been asked to come and discuss some aspects of trauma and how they have impacted the Bethune community. And what are some of the strategies that we are using here to work with our community partners, work with, of course, our school district to ensure that we are doing the most that we can for children and families in need. So I want to first say that when I became the principal of Bethune, I was coming from being the assistant principal at South Philadelphia High School. And so in my time at South Philadelphia High School, we have been so impacted by gun violence and the loss of life of young people that it was truly a saturating experience. What I didn't realize until I got to Bethune was that I was leaving one truly trauma-impacted community and coming to another. So the councilwoman who spoke about living as a resident in a 19140 zip code and all of the true needs that we have, Bethune sits as one of the feeder schools to some of the high schools aforementioned that is in the 19140 zip code. So when I got here as the principal 3 years ago, I realized that there were so many needs and that all the needs that we had were not necessarily able to be met from just one source or pot. We have a lot of gun violence. We also have a lot of issues with food insecurity. We have issues with the lack of permanent housing for many of our families. And as we are not necessarily a official community school, one of the true, underpinnings that I got from being an assistant principal at South Philadelphia High School, which is a community high school, is that schools need to be hubs in community. And so I went and worked on getting some partners to help support us in this very important work. So in order for our children to thrive and not just survive in the need for academic success, we have to remove all barriers. And all barriers are not just those that work with just our basic content information. So one of our partners for Bethune is Temple Phases. Part of what we work with Temple Phases, I really have to thank Karen Lynch, because she was pivotal from our district standpoint in supporting and helping navigate our MOU and relationship to get Temple Phases on board with us as a partner. All partners are not necessarily approved. It has to go through a series of vetting processes to make sure that organizations, learning institutions, especially hospitals, medical team members, are not doing things that will be adverse to already fragile communities of students and families. And so through the vetting process, when all was approved, we began working with Trauma 101. What I realized very quickly after getting here was that in order for us to work with trauma with students, we first had to work with trauma with adults. So it goes back to the adage of if you're on an airplane, first you need your own oxygen before getting oxygen to others, or you won't be able to make it. I didn't understand the severe issues with ACEs scores impacting trauma, compassionate resilience, and how, as teachers who were here, some of which have been in this community for 22 years, what does that fatigue look like when you are constantly giving and your cup is not necessarily continue to be refilled? So we first had to start working with Temple to do a lot of work with the adult culture on trauma for us to really understand that sometimes when children are impacted by consistent traumatic events, particularly in 19140 with the gun violence, homicide rates as high as they are here, that there is always a cousin, sister, brother, aunt, uncle, that we have issues of violence and loss of family. And so it's compounding trauma. It is that someone is being shot, but someone was the shooter. And many times both are in your family organization of school. And so how do you mitigate those things? And so we really started working with Temple to have trainings for our staff on what is the safety plan? How do you invoke your safety plan? What are some of those issues that come up? And then how do you rectify that? If we don't have money in the budget for fidgets and other different tools that we know our children's need, how do we then work with partners like Temple to produce those types of resources so that we can be best outfitted? I think it's also important to note that urban trauma responsive schools that exist in the way in which we are here at Bethune, there is not a national model for here are all the steps so that you can become this complete trauma-informed school. So we're working towards something that does not necessarily exist, and we're doing that with all different kinds of partnerships to respond to what is needed for this community of learners. So the teaching of children in poverty and the teaching of Black and brown children in particular, although I would say I'm definitely not a politician, but our teaching of our children has always been political. And so what we have to remember is that our activism, my activism as a principal, is really from the seat of making sure that this community does not stay disenfranchised, and that this zip code is as worth as many resources and accolades as any other. And so we champion around making sure that we can kind of support and do those different initiatives to make sure we can be as successful as possible for our children, because we believe here at Bethune that each and every student here is worth it. And so we work in partnership to make sure that we can give the teachers the additional supports. We go to conferences that our partners have paid for so that we can continue getting that next level training for trauma-informed work, because we know that it's necessary so that we can continue the work that we're doing. So hopefully that's kind of given some input on how one school at least works within our district, but also with our partners that have been approved to try to get to such a very unprecedented time where we are now virtual and many of our students are just not doing well. And all of the issues that they were facing before are compounded now by issues that have come with this pandemic. And so we really stand on alert to support, but also to continue to reach out for more supports so that we can do what we can do that is best for this community that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Next panelist can begin.
Dr. John Rich.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Councilmember Kim, Councilmember Johnson, members of the Committee on Gun Violence Prevention, Children and Youth. I'm John Rich. I'm a primary care physician. I'm also professor of health management and policy at the Drexel University Dornsife School of Public Health, where I also direct the Center for Nonviolence and Social Justice. And I'm here to speak in support of the resolution to provide access to universal trauma counseling and support for Philadelphia youth. You've already heard a great deal today about the impacts of trauma and adversity, and so I won't go over those in detail, but I do want to emphasize that we know that these adversities and traumas that young people experience as youth come out later in terms of chronic disease, such as heart disease, diabetes, alcoholism, substance abuse, even poor work performance. And we know that these future health concerns are of great concern to us in public health and to the health of our Philadelphia community. We also know that young people who experience these forms of trauma and violence are also at high risk for poor school performance, and that is predictive of other adverse life consequences, including involvement in violence. And then we've heard a great deal as we talk with young people in communities that young people who feel chronically unsafe as a result of exposure to community violence and mistrust of the police and the intrusive symptoms of post-traumatic stress may turn to violence or weapons to defend themselves against perceived threats. Of course, the proliferation of firearms and the absence of effective regulation is a root cause of this problem. So youth who have been exposed to trauma and violence are also more likely to harm themselves directly or in terms of substances that will also impact their futures. But we also know that these young people have incredible potential, even if it's unrecognized by many, and that if they don't have the chance to deal with these traumas, they may not be able to fully flourish, and we all suffer as a city because of that. We also know that trauma is, in a very real sense, contagious. And the community members who are not directly harmed by that violence actually also manifest these symptoms of trauma. And community trauma impacts neighborhoods across Philadelphia negatively, affecting health and well-being. But we also know from public health and medical science that we can intervene at the individual, family, and community levels to decrease the manifestations of these trauma, both prevent and to decrease them after the fact, and also to better equip those who come in contact with youth to address these challenges. At Drexel University, we have Healing Hurt People, which is a hospital-linked trauma intervention program supported by DBH-IDS, and we work with young people between the ages of 8 and 35 in mostly connecting with them in hospital settings, those who have suffered violent injury from gunshot wounds, stabbings, or assaults, as well as those in their families and their circle of friends who have been affected by this violence. And our work has shown that early intervention can decrease many of the trauma-related consequences of violence, including helping with depression, improving sleep quality, and decreasing stress. We've also found that healing circles, where groups of young people come together to support one another, to normalize the experience of healing, and to build effective community, is also a powerful way to help young people heal. Our trained social work staff use specific trauma-supported specific therapies such as trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy to help youth who have been victims of violence to manage their trauma symptoms. Our community health worker peers, young people that we train up through a 9-week training program, are young people who have the lived experience of trauma and have embarked on their own healing journey. And they work as a part of the team to help traumatized youth find healing and safety. These interventions also engage family members who themselves are impacted by vicarious trauma. Based on our experience, we believe that there are a number of key ingredients to providing effective healing services to youth. We need highly trained, diverse, culturally responsive staff to support trauma treatment wherever it happens. Services must embody anti-racist principles and be linguistically and culturally acceptable, intentionally so. That we have to focus on healing and not stigmatizing labels that really are dehumanizing, so that survivors are not re-traumatized by the very systems that are there to help them. Healing services need to be provided in conjunction with other concrete services to address food insecurity, issues of housing and poverty. That's a key way to draw young people into care. We have to tailor these services to the needs of youth rather than one size fits all. Some young people have had a tremendous amount of trauma and loss in their lives. Other young people may not have experienced it directly, and we have to make sure that we're addressing their specific needs. We have to also understand that not every intervention is clinical. We know from a wide range of research that music and yoga, meditation, drumming, movement, and arts, many of the powerfully provided services in schools can be a part of the overall healing approach. We believe strongly in community health workers and certified peer specialists, young people with a lived experience, because they are a critical asset in helping to normalize the experiences of young people. And there's been a lot of talk about social media. Social media can be used to ignite a broader conversation in Philadelphia about trauma and healing. And we, a couple of years ago, launched Our Words Heal, a social media campaign to really create a space where community members who are really the experts in healing, they have done so for generations, can really inform all of us about how to approach this. And so I thank you for the opportunity to support this critical work. Through testimony, I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Rich, and as always, appreciate your hard work, particularly around this issue. Will the clerk please call the next panelist? Not next panelist, the next individual.
Caroline Glavin.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Menapace Glavin. I am the Trauma Assessment Specialist for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Violence Intervention Program and CHOP's Healthier Together Initiative Growing Resilience in Teens program. We work with youth ages 8 to 18 years old to address social determinants of health, specifically around youth's exposure to community violence and trauma. We provide intensive case management and trauma therapy to youth and their families to help them heal from their experiences, reduce re-injury, and bolster resilience. The Violence Intervention Program, which is a program within the Center for Violence Prevention at CHOP, is an example of many programs around the country, such as Healing Hurt People, that are dedicated to breaking the cycle of violence for children and young adults following a violent injury. Because we know that violence permeates communities, impacts entire families, and can lead to poor outcomes, our program provides assistance to youth and families with case management in order to support a family as they obtain medical follow-up care, navigate the legal system, and engage in trauma-focused mental health treatment. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on this very important issue of universal trauma services for young victims of gun violence. I hope to provide insight based on my work that can improve access, resources, and policies that support universal trauma services for young victims of gun violence. There are 3 co-occurring epidemics currently faced by children and youth in Philadelphia: gun violence, COVID-19, and mental health crises. The intersection and severity of these epidemics have exacerbated pervasive psychosocial problems, and the needs of youth and families exceed the current resources designed to respond and provide support. These co-occurring epidemics are also shedding light on long-standing disparities, as they are disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, and people of color, both in Philadelphia and around our nation. As challenging as the last year has been for our community, it has also provided an opportunity to step back and reflect, an opportunity to think creatively and collectively in order to identify the real issues and the sustainable solutions to address our city's struggles. We know that youth who are exposed to community violence are at risk for long-term mental health problems. A study done here at CHOP and the University of Pennsylvania showed that children who lived closest to incidents involving guns were more likely to have emergency department visits for mental and behavioral health issues in the weeks after those incidents. Beneath the numbers of gunshot injuries and deaths are the stories that I hear on a daily basis from the children and families impacted by violence. The youth I work with at CHOP are clearly experiencing increased trauma symptoms. Many of them have trouble sleeping, nightmares, suicidal thoughts, trouble focusing, and are hypervigilant and afraid to walk down certain streets. Our children tell us that they can't stop worrying that something bad will happen to them or to their family and loved ones. We need to do better. We need to come together to prioritize the health and well-being of our children. While no one program, initiative, or intervention is going to fix the crisis that our children face, we can work together to ensure that we care for the entire family to provide a holistic approach. I have learned firsthand the importance of wrapping services around the entire family directly, especially after gun violence. One way that we address the symptoms following a traumatic experience is by providing trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which you have heard about today, and which is an evidence-based treatment for children impacted by trauma, as well as their parents and caregivers. When youth and family members understand that their trauma symptoms are not their fault or because of something they have done wrong, they can start to heal and function better in the outside world. From my work as a trauma therapist, I have seen youth write trauma narratives that highlight their strengths and resilience rather than define them by their trauma. While our services focus on youth, I have seen the gratitude in the hearts of our caregivers when we walk alongside them and help them navigate services after their child is shot or otherwise impacted by violence. Providing safe spaces for youth and caregivers to speak freely, to express their fears, and to give kids a voice is an immeasurable gift. Trauma-focused therapy works when done by well-intentioned, well-trained practitioners. There is a network of dedicated, brilliant practitioners, which you have already heard about today, called the Philadelphia Alliance for Child Trauma Services. This network of child-serving systems provides evidence-based practices like TFCBT for traumatized youth and their families across the city of Philadelphia. The mission of PACS is to increase the number of children and families who receive the most effective trauma-specific care in Philadelphia. While we know that TFCBT works and the PACS network is strong, the current needs of our children and families are far exceeding our capacity. We must come together to identify systematic, sustainable ways to support the growing need for trauma-focused treatment in Philadelphia. One child's story comes to mind. A 15-year-old African-American female entered CHOP's Violence Intervention Program, which we call CHOP VIP, last November after being assaulted in her community. With the support of her family and her CHOP VIP case manager from our program, She made great strides to heal and recover from her violent injury, and she was excelling in school. Then this past month, she was walking down the street with her best friend when they heard gunshots, and her friend pushed her to the ground. She quickly realized that he was hit, and this young girl had to witness her best friend die for no reason other than where they lived. This girl, like so many that I work with, experienced more than one traumatic event in a short time span. She is currently enrolled in trauma-focused CBT, and she's processing the multiple traumatic experiences she has been through. By engaging in this trauma therapy, she has a safe space to discuss her experiences, her fears, her emotions, and her hopes. By engaging in trauma therapy now, she is less likely to experience long-term mental or physical health issues. But unfortunately, in our current landscape, the need is outpacing the available services when it comes to mental health support. There is a necessity for more readily available trauma therapy and services in addition to what's already being provided. We know that stories like this are all too common, and we need to provide better support for the chronic, recurrent, and complex experiences of our youth. Trauma-focused treatment needs to be consistently and readily available for youth and families in Philadelphia. In my experience, we as providers tend to focus services on the identified victims of the gun violence. While this is essential, we know all too well that each victim is someone's child, best friend, sister, brother, cousin, niece, or student. We know that for each episode of gun violence, an entire community is crushed. We must work together to create a larger, more robust network of trauma-focused providers so that every child in Philadelphia and their loved ones have access to the care they need and deserve. I want to thank Council members Johnson and Gim for the invitation to testify today and for holding a hearing on this important issue. And I'm also happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Would the clerk please call the next witness?
Dr. Kathleen Reeves.
Good afternoon. Thank you, co-chairs Gim and Johnson, as well as committee and council members, for the opportunity to talk with you about trauma, violence, and our children. My name is Kathy Reeves. I am a pediatrician. I serve as the Lewis Katz School of Medicine Senior Associate Dean for Health Equity at Temple University, and I also direct the Center for Urban Bioethics, which houses Philadelphia Cure Violence and Philadelphia Healthy and Safe Schools, or phases. I hope to share with you a bit more about Temple University's vision for how we hope to support all of you and all of our city organizations around violence prevention, especially as it impacts Philadelphia's youth. I'm an academic clinician and researcher. My job is to bring new knowledge on how to treat disease. In collaboration with public health, government, and other university researchers, we have all worked together so many times to prevent and cure disease. HIV and cancer were once always a death sentence. Now, both are often a chronic disease. In the past, society criminalized people with tuberculosis. Now we have a medicine to treat it as the infection that it is. You heard from the people on this panel, as well as many of our colleagues last week, about the fact that we know in healthcare, as Dr. Rich said, violence is a public health epidemic. It's a disease, and it's contagious. The CDC has known this for over 10 years. It's not a debate. When people, especially when children see violence, they are far more likely to be violent and to be victims of violence. And that's not an excuse, but an explanation. And it's also a big part of the solution. We already know that a public health approach, if it's reproduced with fidelity, will decrease violence. We know that because of the work we did together. Philadelphia and Temple University, we worked together to study an evidence-based public health approach to violence prevention based on the Cure Violence model. And in that study, we saw 2.5 fewer shootings per 10,000 people per month in cure violence sites versus sites without cure violence teams. Since then, we've done a return on investment. We calculated that most of the shootings in 2018 were in 6 police districts. We saw, even conservatively, a return on investment just from Medicaid and just from direct healthcare costs to the primary shooting event of over $1.60 was saved for every dollar spent. If we include just secondary healthcare costs, mental health care costs, criminal justice costs, we see $32 saved for every dollar invested. It's not a hard thing to see that it's a smart thing to do for the health of our children, and it should be something we can absolutely afford. In fact, it's something we cannot afford not to do. Over half of these shootings in 2018 occurred in these 6 police districts. That was over 650 shootings. About 350,000 people live in those police districts. So based on this data, using the numbers from 2018, if cure violence was present in just these 6 police districts, we can conservatively project back then a reduction in shootings by 220 people, 220 fewer shooters. That means 245 fewer people shot. That's based on data from 2018, when there were 353 shootings and 75 deaths. In 2021, we already have 129 deaths, and we're in April. We're on track to see over 600 shootings. So what does this mean for our children? So I want to talk just a little bit more about how we hope to help support our youth and protect them from being negatively impacted by violence in the first place. And no, there are proven models that work. We have evidence, and like any other epidemic, we need to reproduce what works with fidelity to build a public health approach that's centered on prevention and vaccination. Trauma-informed public health spaces work to address trauma and decrease violence. So I want to share with you what a trauma-informed neighborhood could look like. And it's been such a pleasure to work with Principals Bradell and Dr. Bradley, and with Mastery Gratz High School and Dobbins High School. A trauma-informed neighborhood is centered in the school in those neighborhoods, and it's carried through into the local community. It requires significant evidence-based intervention with even more significant returns. And just like providing the best treatment for heart failure, for cancer, or for COVID-19, we all study what works, and then we produce it exactly how it was studied. I can't say this enough. We know when we're giving Moderna or Pfizer, we know the right dose to give, and we know that it must be given twice. We would never decide to give a lesser dose because we didn't have enough money, or we'd never decide we should only give 1 dose. We would do what works. But sometimes with violence and sometimes with trauma, we look at the evidence and we do part of it, and we don't reproduce it completely, and then it doesn't work. So imagine in Philadelphia neighborhoods with schools, with after-school safe havens for young people who have witnessed great trauma and that are trauma-informed spaces for children and for families to feel safe. Imagine this connected to street teams that are based on a cure violence model that are surrounding these schools, working to decrease neighborhoods in those communities where the children live. Imagine Healing Hurt People as part of that, directly counseling our youth. Imagine principals like Principal Bradell and Bradley moving through that. This is what we're hoping to create with the Philadelphia Healthy and Safe Schools Cure Violence Partnership. As already noted, we've been working with DBH-IDS, with the Philadelphia School District, which we're very grateful for their support, at Bethune, at Kenderton, at Dobbins, and at Mastery Gratz High Schools. And we're developing a stronger and stronger relationship with Healing Hurt People. With all of these amazing partners, we believe Philadelphia can create trauma-informed neighborhoods. And there's no doubt this trauma-informed work is very hard. It is work that requires expertise. It is work that requires all stakeholders to be engaged. This means the school district, the teachers, the school administrative and services staff, the universities, The government, the mayor's office, city council, the hospitals, the children, the families, everyone must be engaged. And we're grateful to be part of such a great team. This is what needed to happen with COVID. This is what we need to do for violence. And we've engaged with community and parents around describing what trauma-informed is. And to be honest, this made us really nervous. We were very concerned that families would not be receptive to what we're saying. But that isn't what happened. The caregivers and the families are all too familiar with childhood trauma because they've suffered from it as well. These entire families and communities deserve better. Philadelphians want to find a way to break the cycle for their children to heal and for their neighborhoods to heal. So making the schools safe, as Principal Bradley pointed out, is a great start. And then we must also have a presence in the neighborhoods. Again, the numbers are staggering. Over 75% of the children in the 19140, just as the council member previously stated, 75% of the kids have heard gunshots. 65% have seen a drug transaction. 75% or more, by the time they are in middle school, know someone who was shot and or someone who was incarcerated because of violence. And many have seen someone stabbed, someone beaten, or a dead body. How can we ever expect people to just go on as if nothing happened when this is their experience? So why do we think trauma-informed neighborhoods work? Again, it's science. There are a few states who have really implemented some pilot trauma-informed neighborhood studies. Washington State, Wyoming, Massachusetts, Louisiana, and California. And what families and neighborhoods have seen is remarkable. In my testimony, I have shared with you over 20 references where such public health-driven, trauma-informed work has led to less violence and healthier communities. And again, we need to reproduce these programs as they were studied. It's worth it. It's the only way we're going to see positive outcomes. And in the long run, we will save dollars and save lives. And we understand, as we move forward, we must look at sustainability. As healthcare providers, we believe in the long term, trauma-informed spaces should be funded with public and healthcare dollars. We believe that the amount of money spent right now trying to treat children suffering from mental health disorders, or going to the emergency room on a regular basis for asthma, or suffering from ongoing violence is far more than the cost of creating trauma-informed neighborhoods. Insurance payers will save significant dollars. Department of Health and Human Services will save significant dollars. And there's plenty to invest to make this happen. And we need people to understand investing healthcare dollars in prevention matters. Right now, Medicaid won't pay for nutritional counseling or education for a child who shows signs of pre-diabetes, only after they have diabetes. We can't wait to support people with trauma-informed programming until after they've been traumatized or after they're a perpetrator or a victim of violence. We need to do it as a prevention. And very quickly, I'd like to just share with you two very quick stories from one of these cities that implemented a trauma-informed program, a trauma-informed neighborhood. The first is Michael. So Michael grew up in the inner city. He had a brother who was 2 years older than him. Michael and his brother were raised by their grandmother. And Michael's grandmother was a wonderful, hardworking woman. She provided Michael and his brother with a good place to stay, good food as best she could, and love. No matter what she did, Michael and his brother were on a bad path. Michael had been physically abused in the past, had witnessed a lot of violence in his neighborhood. And when Michael was 10, his brother was shot and killed only blocks from their home. In school, Michael quickly earned a reputation of being a bad seed. If someone bumped into him in the hallway, he often reacted by pushing back or punching the other student. One day in his 7th grade math class, the student next to him made a joke because Michael got an F on a test. Michael picked up his desk and threw it at the other student. The teacher grabbed him by the arm, physically pulled him into the principal's office. The police were called. He was forced to leave the school. He was suspended, and his grandmother was told his behavior would no longer be tolerated. And she didn't know what to do. Michael stopped going to school. He became well known in the juvenile system, was in legal trouble since he was 15, stole a car, was caught with a handgun, and by the time he was 19, he was in prison for shooting a 20-year-old man who grew up around the corner from him and his brother. The other story is about Kelsey. Kelsey grew up in the same neighborhood as Michael. When she entered 8th grade, her mother was struggling with addiction. Her mother experienced terrible abuse when she was a child and was working hard to overcome her own depression and anxiety. Kelsey didn't often feel safe and experienced and witnessed a lot of trauma during her childhood as well. She was often disruptive in school, and her current school thought it was detrimental to the other students for her to remain. She was transferred to another school that was trying something new. It was a trauma-informed school in a trauma-informed neighborhood. Kelsey says she was shocked when, after participating and starting a violent fight with another girl during school, she wasn't immediately arrested and kicked out of school. Instead, she went to the principal's office to cool off. I was given a bottle of water, a gentle pat on the back, and time to reflect on my behavior. Even the school cop talked to me calmly and helped me discuss what I had done. There were consequences. She was given a 3-day in-school suspension, and an official complaint was made with the police. Those 3 days were spent keeping her up with her schoolwork while she took part in intense sessions with trained social workers who helped her understand the trauma. Graduated with a 4.0 GPA and now is in community college. She's pretty clear. If it wasn't for that transfer, she's not sure she would even be alive today. So it's not rocket science. We've known since 1998, as other people have said, adversity in childhood leads to chronic heart disease, diabetes, cancer, addiction, and violence. You've heard that people who suffer from childhood trauma 3 times more likely to have heart disease, 4 times more likely to have asthma, 6 times more likely to suffer from addiction, 8 times more likely to have their life negatively affected by violence. The majority of people incarcerated for violent offenses have experienced chronic, significant childhood trauma. It is the biggest under-recognized epidemic of our generation. And it's scientific. And the last example I'll give you, imagine you're in a forest and a bear is chasing you. Your adrenaline and your cortisol and other hormones are very high because right now you don't want to solve a math problem. You don't want to interact with someone else. You want to run or you want to fight back. But what happens if the bear chases you every day? What happens if your brain is bathed in adrenaline and cortisol every day? We know from PET scans, from MRIs, from blood tests, that the physiology of children is changed because of chronic elevation in stress hormones. We also know this can be reversed with trauma-informed healing practices, but it has to happen in childhood. So what we're proposing with phases in Cure Violence and that model together, working with the school district, with DBHIDS, with Healing Hurt People, is looking at neighborhoods that create healing spaces that will help children heal from the negative effects of this ongoing cortisol and adrenaline and trauma they face each and every day. So again, I want to thank you for your dedication to helping our most vulnerable children. The science is clear. The research that's done with this is as clear as it was decades ago, linking high cholesterol to heart disease. If we want our children in our Philadelphia neighborhoods to be safe, we must be directed, we must be clear and reproduce with fidelity the same way we would do with vaccinations, cancer, or HIV treatment. and provide support in neighborhoods in ways that help children be healthy. We know it works. I hope, my hope, our hope is to see Philadelphia as the first city to support all of our neighborhoods to become trauma-informed spaces. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Councilwoman Gill?
Yeah, this was, first of all, I want to thank all of the panelists really for your expertise. We spent a lot of time with a number of you talking through some things. And, I think Dr. Reeves, your testimony really did lay out a broader vision for what we need to be doing. And I, would love to continue to press forward on some of the things that you raised. My first question is for Dr. Rich, and to ask you what kind of a rating, I don't know if you do this, may not be entirely within your work, but what kind of rating would you give the city of Philadelphia and our ability to meet the needs, the trauma needs of young people, given what we're facing right now?
Yeah, I don't know that I could give a rating compared to, for example, other cities. I think that Philadelphia has a set of unique issues that relate to, for example, the levels of poverty, the racial composition and makeup, the prevalence of racial trauma in the city. What I would say is that Philadelphia has great potential because I think of all the places, many of the places across the country, there has been an ongoing conversation about trauma and healing in Philadelphia and the vision of a trauma-informed city really leading the nation, I think, over the past few years. Now, obviously, implementation of that is key. But I don't think we're obviously not where we want to be. I think there's a great potential for us to not have to overcome the burden of even convincing folks that trauma is important.
Yes, I should not have put you in a place where you heard some of the testimony from before about a lot of us have been in this space for a very, very long time. We work with a lot of institutional entities. One of the things I guess that I would ask, just because you've seen a lot of this, is that there, even though there's been a lot of explicit commitment, there's a clear recognition, we aren't really, there isn't clarity about whose responsibility it is to pull these elements together. So we can have a school district that has a lot of data, but they're not in a formal binding relationship with the charter schools, except in the most, contractual of things. Maybe we have DBH doing their work within a broader system of care. You've got the police department, you've got, different agencies and others. Are you seeing something like, do we actually need to kind of like what Dr. Reeves was saying is you really need a broader system. You have council members really complaining about there's not really a plan here. We have resources now, which is very different from where we were a decade, 15 years ago. We're not in an austerity mindset necessarily, but do you feel like we need to really be pulling all these entities together within neighborhoods, within a city, within taking a look at school systems? Or do you think we should just go and move as quickly as we can in the spaces that we can, which is sometimes what we do when we are bereft of a larger organizing entity?
I think it's critical that we don't have silos in this. Trauma cuts across so many systems. When a child leaves a school and walks down the street, we can't assume that child has left the umbrella of protection of the city because it's now passed, the baton has been passed to the police, for example. So I do think that from a public health perspective, we need to coalesce the data So as Dr. Reeves was saying, we need the data to drive us to not only what works, but where the key confluence of issues is. So I would say we do need a larger strategy that falls under a public health approach, not a criminal justice approach, but a public health approach. And I think that, but we also can't stop doing what we're doing. This is the challenge we obviously have to deal with the emergent needs of young people today and what they're facing. But I think we can do both at the same time. It really is not an either or. And especially, as you point out, if we have new resources coming together to make sure that we are the best stewards of those resources to have a coordinated strategy. I couldn't agree more with that.
Okay. And then Dr. Reeves, you talked a lot about like the need for these healing spaces. Do you have a sense of, are these healing spaces as diverse as the children in the neighborhoods in the city that we're in? Because can it be like small organizations? Does it, when we talk about healing spaces, can it be schools? Are you talking just generally that all spaces could be healing spaces, or are there specific spaces that we need to, make sure are healing spaces should they exist, i.e., a rec center, a school, an institutional anchor of some sort within a community?
So I think in a similar way that violence is contagious, so can healing be. And I think schools, we are a city of neighborhoods, and our schools are central to that. And I think if we start in schools and then move out to the other primary stakeholders, but we need people involved that really understand the communities. There are amazing community organizations out there with infrastructure that can do amazing things and create these spaces. There's other organizations that are struggling that would need more support before they could do that. And we need a organized way to evaluate that. And we're also a city with great poverty, with great violence, who we haven't been able to implement any kind of after-school safe haven weekend summer program. And I think that finding a way to build spaces in schools, safe havens after-school programs, and then moving them to bigger organizations, having those bigger organizations help the smaller organizations, and then eventually will help the families. Families want this in their homes. And people didn't experience it because a lot of the caregivers today were victimized by the same generational trauma that's victimizing their children. Okay. And so I think it's all spaces. We just have to be really thoughtful on how we move it out, is my thought.
Is Principal Bradley still on the line? I don't know if she had to.
Yes, I am here.
Hi, Principal Bradley. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Have you thought about, I think you made this extremely compelling argument about why, even though we may see many of the high schools being impacted for the older students, that actually, we really need to think about the feeder schools into those high schools. This is a very important issue. You're looking at communities, neighborhoods. High schoolers have siblings, as has been well noted, yeah. And how important it is. Now, you're at Bethune Elementary. You are a K-8 school, is that right? Or K?
We're pre-K-8, so we start with 3-year-olds.
And in your ideal staffing model, if you could create, as Dr. Reeves has said, a healing space, yeah. For the children and families that you serve, what kind of staffing would you ideally want at Bethune?
I think ideally some things that would, some positions of support that would help enhance our efforts would be definitely a social worker on staff. We do have a wonderful counselor, but I would also have an additional counselor because we just have that amount of trauma that is impacting our community. So don't forget that little people grow up to be bigger people. And so when a former Bethune student is a victim of gun violence, it still kind of reverberates and ripples back down to the elementary where their younger siblings and families still reside. So we've lost about, in the last 2 years, about 8 former Bethune students to gun violence, and many of them have younger cousins and family members still here at the school. So we also would really want a full-time trauma specialist, one who really knows about how to help our community of teachers, support staff, as well as families navigate in trauma water. So the supports that we do have from Dr. Reeves and Temple Faces are helpful, but we do share those resources, and we don't necessarily have anyone who just exclusively lives here at Bethune. And believe it or not, we will also then really love to have other community liaison kind of supports, someone who can really help families with how to fill out for bail funds and food scarcity and all of these things that as academicians we don't know what to do with. Having a community liaison that knows all those ins and outs would also be helpful. And Bethune is also working on encouraging urban agriculture. So someone who would be like a part-time urban farmer that really could help take our little 5 garden boxes and turn that into a more fruitful investment will also be some of the types of positions that we would love to benefit from as a school community.
And have you made those requests to the School District of Philadelphia out of curiosity?
I think some of these positions do exist. And so to be really clear, we are always tasked with choosing from a litany of the needs that we have and trying to get priority to those that are more immediate than others. So I'm sure that the district is well aware of my request for like a social worker and other supports, but as was evident earlier, that many of those resources are going into secondary, where there is that direct correlation between, the gun violence and the victim and the shooter, but they do come from elementary schools where we can even get more preventative measures in place. We may be able to kind of lessen some of what is happening in high school. If we can show little people how to deal with conflict on schoolyard before they become bigger students and their schoolyard becomes neighborhoods, we may be able to be more preventive in some of the violence that we have.
And could you, you spoke about how many students and former students of Bethune had been harmed by gun violence. I did also just want to say that there may have been 600 homicides, but there are far more shootings. I think that might have been a statistic that was raised. Probably 4 times more shootings that are involved. But and you've obviously, you've been at South Philadelphia High School, so you certainly saw this. Can you walk us through, so if someone's harmed, a former student is harmed, that family members or siblings may be involved at your school. What happens the next day after an incident might, a violent incident might occur? What kinds of things kick into place for Bethune?
So I think the most important thing is that we have earned the trust of our community. So most of the times, those incidents, particularly if we're not directly impacted, because it's not one of our current students, our community members let us know what is happening. We do then evoke, of course, first and foremost, our counselor, who has a myriad of supports that she can reach out to outside of the school that are inclusive in district supports if there is a greater need. But here, because of our relationship with Temple Phases, we also reach out to our trauma support that we have there if the family, not necessarily the student, because of the protections for students, etc. But we do also offer families if there's some outside supports that they may need. that we are here. So, we really try to be very responsive, even when it's not a current student, but someone who may have been a student 3 or 4 years ago, they are still part of the Bethune family. And so these things don't, trauma doesn't happen in isolation. And so oftentimes you still have the cousins, the little people. And so something happens in a high school and it reverberates back to elementary, where many of the younger siblings are often met with just the grief of it without a proper language and how to express it. So we just jump into action as best we can to support the family and community. We also do like yearly a balloon release. We do have, for those who are also concerned with the environment, we did have the research done. These are the types of balloons that then evaporate. They're very expensive balloons, but balloons nonetheless. But we do a release type of ceremony with support with counselors, etc., to help our children kind of release some of the pain and angst. And we have additional counselors on schedule at that time. But those are some of the other ways that we look to honor the lives that are lost, even when they are lives lost after leaving the school.
And let's see. I guess, I'm hearing that you will say that unless it's a student at Bethune, you are not necessarily alerted that
Correct.
a former graduate might have been impacted. Is that right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So you would have to hear it from an external source of some sort.
Right.
Okay.
But because we have so many boots on the ground, we really do. Those things really come right back to the school a lot faster, perhaps, than even official channels would be able to do. Text, I get texts from community members, etc. So I just think that there's so much pain that young people are dealing with, and the more ways that we can get on hearings and calls and come up with solutions that really will feed into direct action and the impact on our constituents, and for me, those constituents are those in the 191 40 Bethune catchment area, the better it is for us all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We fully support that. And then I'm hearing that you'll say that you have a counselor who's on staff and you have the partnership with Temple University. Mm-hmm. And then is there any other, are you outreach to by, any other agencies, either a CUA, a DHS, or other entities? Because it sounds like you're dealing with trauma, and even though it's not directly your student who is directly in front of you, you're still impacted by it and still needing to provide services over and beyond what you would normally do during the school day. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think we also have that prevention and that prevention specialist that the counselor can always reach out to if there's asking. Is someone else talking? We also have those. We do have also other district supports. If in fact there is something that is overwhelming or out of the purview of our school counselor, that we can always call to get direction. We do work with CUA workers, of course, and DHS, but not necessarily for violence impacted issues that come up as one-off situations. We work with them all the time. As they have cases, of course, but there really, to my knowledge, are not a lot of official things that happen with the feeder schools if the violence and the life loss was that in a high school, unless we kind of do our own informal networks. And also principals, of course, support one another. And so if in fact there's something that's happening at a high school, and they know that there's a sibling that attends your school, we as administrators always reach out and speak to one another to try to make sure that we are as supportive as possible. So, we have a lot of informal networks, but not necessarily all, solidified district policies to my knowledge.
Sure. And then finally, since you don't have a social worker, you're not part of the STEP program for this school district, right?
I am not.
Okay. And how many students did you say had been impacted by gun violence since 2020, would you say?
Well, as you stated before,
former.
We've lost 6 and some say 8. We're trying to get clarity there on how many of our former students have been lives lost to gun violence. We're actually working on a mural to commemorate that loss at this time. However, we don't have necessary official numbers because they're not current students. So we really are working with our community to kind of give us that information so that we can then memorialize them here as best we can, as they are still always a part of our community.
Thank you so much, Principal Bradley, for all your work, and stay in touch and keep advocating for the resources that you need. And just thank you very much to all the testifiers today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody who testified on this panel. Will the clerk please call the next panel?
We have Shantae Love.
To Kathleen Reed, I'd like to follow up with you regarding the cure violence model as well.
Absolutely, Council Member. I look forward to it.
Shantae Love.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Council Gim and Council Johnson, for allowing me to have this opportunity to talk. I am in awe and excited that we are having this dialogue. I'm upset that we have to have it. The great part is that what I'm hearing is my colleagues that I've worked with, we are all still doing phenomenal work on trauma and how important it is. Let me first tell you that I'm one of the founders and directors of Emir Healing Center, which started behind the murder of my brother, Emir Green, which occurred in 1997. And I will tell you that murder and violence changed the DNA of our family and our community. The dreams and opportunities that was supposed to happen would completely be railroaded. That as a family, we always believed in the concept of the African proverb of village, and so we always acted that way. So in our humble beginnings, we studied when we decided that we were going to form Emir Healing Center, which stands for Every Murder is Real. We studied countries that had exhibited war. And so more than 20 years ago, we were looking at not only countries that had war, but also soldiers who experienced it. And at that time, we compared the level of violence from wars to our communities. And we knew at that time, more than 20 years ago, that our communities were in trouble. And that we knew that our children would be in trouble, our families would be in trouble, our schools would be in trouble. And we know that the evidence that showed the exposure to this level of violence was going to rip at the pure fabric of not only an individual, a family, a neighborhood, and a city. And that ripping at that fabric of violence would cause a level of pain and trauma that is unheard of. I will tell you the difference between war is that when it's over, then we flood resources to rebuild. The problem is that our war is not over. We are constantly living in communities, are constantly living in that. I don't have to tell you a lot about what trauma does to individuals and families because it's been shared by a lot of my colleagues. But what I will tell you is that the resolution that was offered about us having trauma throughout, I totally support because it's necessary for us all to reset. That in this system of this epidemic of violence that's inside of a pandemic, that we have been exposed and seen a level of violence that's unheard of. This week, we are looking at a trial and our young people are experiencing the murder of George Floyd, witnessing right before their eyes. And at Emir Healing Center, we have started We've been doing this work for more than 20 years, having a holistic and trauma-informed approach to healing our families and our communities. And we've been doing this since the beginning because we understood and knew that trauma that will be experienced needed to be felt at the community level. And it needed to be felt so that community members knew what it looked like, understood it, trained for it, and so that they could manage something different. And at Emir Healing Center, our healing components, which is our wellness, is that we offer healing circles for families to go through the healing process. Our support groups allow us to work with moms, aunties, as well as pop-pops and uncles and brothers and young people. We believe in alternative ways, along with our therapy and our counseling, that the alternative ways of healing is extremely important because the method of getting trauma care has to be versatile. It can't be a one-fit-all. And because it can't be that, because people are very different, we are art therapy for young people, which I'm very proud of, but I'm very saddened is that I've had to add an art therapy group on Sunday. And so last month, we seen 180 young people from the ages of 12 to 16. Not expected to do that. We weren't expected to be at that type of level of working with young people that's been experienced, that has suffered from homicide, the exposure of it, their ability to no longer trust systems or each other, living on the edge in a state of flight or fight, not being their adrenaline's still moving, teaching them how do they have concrete skills in healing and in learning, and how do they do that, and also create and changing the landscape. It's extremely important that our communities understand that and know that. And so along with our yoga, our meditation, our music, healing through music, as well as through nutrition, we know that coping mechanisms and that people will gravitate towards what they know that comforts them. And if comforting them is food or alcohol, then they will do that. But it's that small window that when something happens, a very small window that we have the opportunity to get in and to be able to help them walk differently, to also not only validate their pain, but give them the skill set so that they can move forward in a healthy way. And it needs to happen all over. I will tell you about our We Live project. Our We Live project is made up of all young people who drive the messaging of hope and peace and love, understand, learn about trauma, learn about the ills that young people go through, but also take control over it. It's youth-led and it's adult-supported. That the work that we're doing with young people around trauma is beneficial. Not only is it beneficial, it's necessary. It has to continue throughout our city. That our continued what we're doing in the Northwest is that we've created a collective. And in that collective, it works with trauma. Their jobs is that community groups have come together to have a trauma-informed community that has restorative justice behind it. And what does that look like? That looks like community members that are going to groups that work on the education, groups that work on the poverty, groups that work on economics, groups that work on home ownership, is that we all come together and we teach everyone, my mom and pop that sits on the porch, what trauma looks like, the corner store guy know what trauma looks like, and how to relate, that the funeral home director can know what trauma is. And knowing that allows and giving people the skill set to engage with each other differently is too important. It can't be from a level of learning trauma from here and coming down. It has to be us bringing evidence-based and evidence-informed where the rubber meets the road right here, and we drive it, and that the community creates that narrative. I am excited that the faith-based we just met with have come on board, where they will learn about what trauma is, so that they not only know what it is, and that they could also not re-traumatize, but also be a support. And that if we're looking at communities as a whole and looking at schools as a whole, I will tell you that the largest challenging component is community partners being able to partner sometimes with schools. Because what we do know is that the community partners have the pulse of the environment. And it's an asset that we have been able to link the schools up from elementary all the way to high school, where we will work together and work with them to create that. Not only that, to be a resource for those principals and a support. Doing that is necessary because trauma impacts our families and our communities at age 0 from the womb because of the family who has experienced overexposure to it. We can't stop there. Mm-hmm. That the work that Emir Healing Center is doing with all of our community partners is invaluable, and that we must be able to teach, and not only teach across the board. It has to be in schools, it has to be in faith-based, it has to be in neighborhoods and in rec centers. I will tell you that we had the opportunity to do a healing component for a rec center who had a shooting at a pool. And our main job was to bring young people in to not only teach them what trauma was and how do they cope, but in different ways, through financial literacy, through activities, through creating messages and social media and videos, to all those things that are required to have a healthy neighborhood. And we are successful with it. But what's the problem? Is that there needs to be a level of resources that's committed to driving that. And there needs to be a level of commitment that connects us all, that doesn't leave anyone out, because it's too important, because it's too necessary. When we're looking at trauma around our neighborhoods and our schools, it is essential that not only do the educators know what trauma is and learn about it, but they are able to implement it. Because I do believe that at times that they're so overwhelmed that they have become desensitized. And so getting them the resources as well. And so I do support this resolution with all of my recommendations that we're able to do this. And I believe we can, because we're together doing it. I thank you.
Thank you, Shantae Love. And as always, good seeing you always on the front line, speaking truth to power and addressing the most critical issues that need support. So thank you very much. Will the clerk call the next witness?
Dr. Kalila Lee.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Lee.
Good afternoon, Councilman Johnson. Councilwoman Kim, thank you for inviting me. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to start before I share with you all my written component that I wanted to share with you all as an invite. I just want to talk about just a few numbers that I heard as everyone was presenting. So I saw the table that Dr. Wolfers shared from the school district, and I just want to say that I was taken aback that Overbrook was number 6 on that list. And when we're talking about approximately 200 schools in the city of Philadelphia, that means that Overbrook is at the top 3% of that list. When we're talking about the crises and checking the pulse of our young people, just in the school district of Philadelphia schools that are being serviced, that's approximately 126,000 students. As I hear all of the wonderful organizations that spoke this morning and this afternoon in regards to gun violence and how we can support young people and how we talked about communities, what I did not hear was schools being at the hub of the community. Oftentimes, organizations making decisions about schools and leaving school leaders, teachers, students, and parents out of the conversation in regards to the resources that we need as a school. So I'm going to share my piece with you all that I was asked to share. Good afternoon, council members, Councilwoman Gim, Councilman Johnson. My name is Dr. Kalia Lee, and I am the proud principal of Overbrook High School. But like many of you here today, I also wear many other hats as a mother and a fellow Philadelphian. On March 18, 2021, I shared a very brief 3-minute testimony at the School District of Philadelphia Board Monthly Meeting. Though nothing I would say was especially profound about what I said, what I did share is the calling of 3 names: Wasim Mason, Sabir Mack, and Tamir Brown. 3 students of Overbrook High School who were murdered via gun violence within a span of 5 months. I heard the gasp of air and I saw the shaking of heads. And as I continued to speak, I simultaneously thought, oh wow, are there really people who do not believe that this is the day-to-day of so many children in our city? And how it is very unfortunate that this is our reality. And because it is such a reality of our children and what they face trauma. Trauma that children do not know how to manage, navigate, or contain. And then what happens? The cycle continues. Oftentimes, the evidence of the traumatic experience our children have to cope with is acted out in maybe the only place, and I've heard this word shared continuously this morning and this afternoon, the only place that many of our children feel safe are in schools. Additionally, this trauma, the weight of loss and grief and violence is carried not just by the students, but by the staff and the caretakers and the entire school community. But sometimes the resources, and I know we have a lot of resources, I heard it, you heard it, but they are not necessarily always the right resources, or they're not enough resources, or the resource may seem not reachable to students that may not have the health insurance, or they need to go to a place versus having people go to them. I know we have resources in the district. I know we have resources in our city, but they may not be the right resource for our schools. When placing resources or selecting resources in schools, it cannot be a cookie cutter approach. And I heard the physician, Dr. Rich, clearly say that is no one approach. Parents, teachers, school leaders, students, community members, you guys, council members, you should be part of the decision making. And so I heard the word STEP, and I do have a STEP team here at Overbrook, as Karen Lynch mentioned. I have a clinical social worker, Dana, she's phenomenal. I have a social worker case manager, Aisha, she's phenomenal. They're just 2 people. They have done a remarkable job when our young people call in the middle of the night, or they have to partner with our Counselor Poland or Counselor Davenport to go reach our students. And they do meet with our DHS worker. And they do meet with our cool resources. And we do have an MOU with the intensive behavioral health services. We do have those things. But they're not coming in the middle of the night. They're not coming on Saturday and Sundays. This looks fantastic on paper, but how it looks day to day in the lives of our school is much different. It does not feel like a partnership when we are not the ones, the school leaders who are at the hub of basically controlling what we need and what that looks like for our young people and our students. As a school, as a principal, it feels like missed resources. And so I share with you about gun violence, but let me give you something else about another young person that happened on March 20th. She called my counselor in a frantic on an early Saturday morning on the 20th, saying she was violently assaulted by girls and that she's now stuck in Ben Salem. My counselor immediately calls me and she's like, what do I do? And so immediately to myself, I say, who do I call? Where does she go? What is the plan? Where do I go? Where do I, as a school leader, how do I advise my counselor? Where do we go for help? Because I know I can't leave her in Ben Salem. I have to go get her. I have to go be with her. There are many questions. There are many questions and decisions I have to deal with as a principal. Following the death of a student, it will be helpful to have additional information and support laying out how certain situations will be handled or should be handled. And yes, as a district, we do have a flow chart, but it's just not a district issue. It is everybody's issue. And so I get a white paper. That's how I'm notified. Or I think one of my colleagues mentioned maybe somebody in the community may, send me a text or call. But then whose responsibility is it to rally all the people? The school is in the center of West Philadelphia. Whose job is it to say, okay, I need help here, I need help here, we need support here. I don't know if they're hiding guns outside the door. We don't have alarms on our doors, all of those things. Whose responsibility is that? How do we make sure that even though every school is different, but we have templates to be able to communicate with families in a community to get those letters and that communication out quickly? And then what are the additional safety measures that can be put in place to help establish a feeling of safety in schools? So we talk about our children, but we also have teachers and other members in this school that me, as the principal, is responsible for making sure they are safe. People, everyone, this is the life of a principal. This is my life. So when we are asking for counselors or assistant principals or additional support or climate managers, it is because we need responsible, competent adults who will help us as principals when we get the late night or the early morning call, who will walk with us for blocks, and I mean blocks, so to protect our children from harm's way. We're doing that. And our children are saying, can you just help me? I need help and I don't know where to turn. APs, counselors, climate managers, additional support are those same individuals I call to do grief counseling, to do home visits with me when we experience something as 3 murders in 5 months. They help in connecting the dots to students and families. So why is it that they're not at the core of this work? We need more caring adults who can build trusting relationships with our youth and families, who can help not only respond to violence, but to also engage and mentor young people towards opportunities and relationships that can help avoid and prevent gun violence. So me sharing my thoughts is simple. Again, it is nothing profound. It is nothing profound about what I'm saying. And I don't want to discredit anyone's work. Simply to say, help us, help the children we serve in a way that actually feels resourceful. Engage school leaders, students, teachers, counselors, climate managers in a conversation of what we need to support the children that we see every single day in dealing with trauma. Let's have a plan that outlines as a school, a district, and a city, that what we do after I receive a white paper and an email before the tears come trickling down my eyes to say that we lost another child that has been murdered and gunned down in the street, that we are saying that we're going to do better. And this is not to say that schools, we don't get it done. We get it done. We're very good at being responsive, reactive, pulling together all the resources. We do that very, very well. But why should we have to keep doing it with less and less? And then I'm going to conclude with this. How do we help and tell our fellow Philadelphians that every time, unfortunately, that we lose a child, that we are sorry, and as public servants in this city, that we will do better? Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Chair, you are on mute.
Just for the sake of time, I'm going to call on my colleagues before we have to do a recess, because we do have a hearing that's coming up at 2 o'clock, so we will not be able to go but so much further. But prior to that, I just want to check with my clerk. Is there anyone else on this particular panel before I allow my colleagues to ask their comments and questions?
Yes, we have John White Jr.
On this particular panel, okay. Call Mr. John White Jr. and then we'll have the comments from my three colleagues, and then we will formally go into a recess until April the 15th at 1 p.m. Clerk, please call.
Mr. John White Jr.
Good afternoon, members of council. In the recognition of our time, I'm going to try and just make a couple of simple points. Number one, it's funny how the past, our history repeats itself. 1974, there were 43 young black men who were shot and killed through gang violence. The way it was addressed was simple. The community was so outraged that they got the courage to confront it. They were so outraged that they had the courage to confront it. Whether it was the mothers, Mom Crippens and Roxanne Jones and Louise Brookins, who stood on a corner with their broom and ran the kids off the corner. Or it was black elected officials like Lucian Blackwell and Dave Richardson, Hardy Williams, who used their political influence and pressured city government back then to fund a program called Crisis Intervention. That was 1973. What's missing today is that community outrage. That community outrage that will give them courage to confront their neighbors' children in an effort to end the violence. As much as you have done as council members in bringing your respective districts together, it still has not generated the outrage necessary for addressing this issue from the bottom up. Secondly, because of work that I've done in the country, I can tell you without any fear of successful contradiction that Philadelphia has more services provided to its citizens at the community level than any other city in the United States of America. We yet have no really appreciation for the expertise, the commitment, the compassion that so many people have in the city of Philadelphia to address these issues. The failure is this. We are so wealthy with services that we don't even know who's providing the service. We don't know each other. We're all working in the same space. But the absence of collaboration among those who are providing the professional treatment and assisting people around accessing needed services cannot lead to any success. We need to not only share in a hearing such as this, the next meeting ought to be among all of the folks who have been identified so we can share our information and share our resources. There is no reason why the principal of my neighboring high school does not know or has not had access to information that will guide them to the crisis services that are available to address the two situations that she brought for us. We don't know each other, and it is an embarrassment of riches that we have not yet shared amongst each other. That's critical. I'm hearing all the different issues, and I'm noticing how many providers in the city of Philadelphia in the behavioral health space are operating evidence-based programs to address some of these issues, to engage some of these children, to engage these families in addressing traumatic situations and ongoing trauma. And I use the word ongoing because trauma is reinforced in the eyes, the ears, and the minds of our young people 24 hours a day. I get it. People around the country are interested in the trial of Chauvin in Minneapolis. But your children, our children, my grandchildren, my sons are watching a traumatic event all day long. Everywhere they turn, their trauma is being reinforced. We have to counter that. Lastly, this. When I was fortunate enough to serve in the cabinet, and we started the first effort to provide community-based services with some focus on prevention, the budget secretary said to me, well, that sounds good, but nobody is advertising that the governor helped keep me off of drugs. They put that money into railroads and highways. It's a big sign. Paid for or brought to you by His Excellency, the Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But when you prevent again, there's no such advertisement. Prevention is the least, it does not show up as a priority in any budget, in any of our legislative bodies. Prevention. As I listened to all the testimony this morning, prevention was the least emphasized. Folks have mentioned it, and correctly so. But the focus, yes, address the trauma. There are trained professionals already in that space. But what are we doing to prevent the next traumatic situation from occurring? And I'm going to leave it there, council people, in hopes that some of this makes sense to you and allows you to think beyond what the obvious. We're going to do. In a city as rich as this one, in the services provided to the community, we ought to know who's doing that work. We ought to look for avenues, not to collaborate, but to coordinate the services that we're providing in the schools or the neighborhood basis. Trauma. It is an uphill battle. You take one step forward, 2 steps back. Because during a therapeutic session, you're addressing it with that young person or with that group, and then they go home. And later that night, they're hearing the same gunshots that had made them feel in a traumatic situation to begin with. So you start out over again and trying to instill confidence in young people that they can be safe. So I thank you for just this opportunity to share, but we at the consortium consider to be some basics about how to address the myriad of problems. They are not disconnected. They are, in fact, connected. We've got to find a way to bring all of these highly qualified, compassionate, committed people on the street, if you would say, Councilman Johnson, so that we can share that information, share our services. There are plenty of evidence-based programs that are operating in the city of Philadelphia. Plenty. But we're all disjointed. And we're just as guilty. We're just as guilty. So you can bring the pressure. You can be the impetus for taking all of these rich, well-serving, effective providers across the spectrum and let us come together in a united and coordinated way to address these issues that are so dear to us. And so I thank you, councilmen and council members,
Thank you very much. I'm going to call on Isaiah Thomas, then Kendra Brooks, and then Councilwoman, Madam Chair, Helen Kim will give the closing remarks. We will be recessing and picking up exactly where we are leaving off on Thursday, April the 15th at 1 p.m. to address this critical and important issue. And I want to thank all my panelists who are participating, but those who have not had the opportunity to go based upon us running out of time because we have another hearing that's scheduled that's supposed to start at 2 o'clock. We thank you for being patient with us, and hopefully you will be able to participate next Thursday, April the 15th at 1 p.m. Isaiah Thomas, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I'll pass on my comments because I wanted to do a deeper dive with Dr. Kalia and some of the things that was discussed there. So I will pass in the interest of time, and I look forward to us having this conversation in the future. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Chair.
You're welcome. Council Member Kendra Brooks.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank all the panelists that had spoke. I do appreciate them confirming my earlier passion around some of these issues. It was very affirming at being very passionate about this issue. And I look forward to the next one. I won't do any questions. I'll follow up with several principals at a later date. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Councilwoman Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I, too, will follow up at our next hearing and just wanted to thank you and Councilmember Gim for this hearing, but also thank Dr. Lee for her poignant testimony representing Overbrook High School. I taught at Overbrook High School early on in my career and recognize the challenges that are still faced there and look forward to working with her and all those who have testified to ensure we are making a difference for our young people, particularly for this upcoming school year, but throughout this entire summer. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. And I'm going to also ask if there are any of the panelists who already testified, who has an interest in coming back next Thursday, April the 15th at 1 p.m. to do a follow-up as relates to their comments, because some members may have some burning questions that they may want to address in the public and the transparent setting. Feel free to follow my office. I'm going to turn it over to Madam Chair, Helen Gim.
Thank you very much, colleague. And, again, appreciate your tremendous leadership on this issue. Grateful to all our colleagues who joined us on here, and especially to our panelists, many of whom waited for a significant amount of time in order to be able to testify, to lend their perspectives and expertise. Dr. Lee, we really appreciate your testimony as a principal. I think you drove home what many of us feel is a very important issue, and what I think Mr. White also said is our responsibility right now. You asked after a horrible incident of violence, whose job is it? And the fact that you, as a principal of a school that is clearly at the epicenter of all of this, is asking that question means we have to do more. There's no question. I think our council members' frustration earlier, Council Member Brooks, is shared by many of us who've been in this space for a very, very long time. And that we need to be purposeful about this work. I think we need to spend more time, Councilmember Johnson. I think we need to spend more time with our youth. I think we need to spend more time with our principals and with educators who are on the ground in order for us to be able to meet where Mr. White is saying all these other providers who are again, as Dr. Lee said, this is it's not meant to impugn anybody. People are busy, they're doing their work, but every once in a while we've got to step back from what we're doing right now. And now is that time to really ask ourselves, is this going the way we need? Are we reaching the young people that we need to reach? Are we saving enough lives? And that answer right now is no. No matter how hard we're working, the answer is no. Our young people are telling us no. Our principals and our educators are telling us no. So it's not to say that we're not well-intentioned in this space. We're not working hard enough. We need to step back right now and reassess what we're doing. We got to get support to those schools that were identified. And Councilmember Johnson, I think in the 7 days that we've got until our next hearing, we want to get more information from the school district. We want to spend some more time with those principals at those schools. And we want to send a clear message. Hearings are not all about getting answers all the time. Sometimes we're lucky we can get a commitment because it's been, a pressing thing. I think we are here making I think what's been made really clear is that a plan still needs to be carved. We've known that for a while, but it's never been made more explicit or more urgent by the testimony of Dr. Lee, by Principal Bradley, and many, many others. And we've been shown that there's a path. Dr. Rich, John White, Dr. Reeves, Shantae Love, there's a path. We do need to apply ourselves to get there. And I just want to thank my partner, always, Councilmember Johnson, for being such a great colleague and really devoted to that mission. Thank you.
And we're also very, very grateful, Councilman. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for taking time, all of you, for being here on this. Probably, if you would ask me, it's one of the most critically important issues that we're addressing right now. Also, and acknowledge my colleague, Councilman Mark Squilla, for taking time out of his schedule for being here. We see a lot of great things taking place here in the city of Philadelphia, but I always view the city of Philadelphia as a tale of two cities, right? We see great development taking place all throughout the city, but we also see a city in crisis right now. And so on top of a pandemic, we're dealing with a gun crisis where we could possibly lose a whole generation of young people. We stay on continuously on this path that we're on. So for me, having this hearing really just gets to the heart of the nature of why we do the work that we do, but really stepping up to the plate and rising to the occasion when it comes to saving our young people. But most importantly, doing a deeper dive and addressing the root cause of why our young people are so angry, why our young people are picking up guns in the first place and deciding to take the lives of one another, and the purpose of why we're having this issue. How are they dealing with this trauma? And for me, it just hits home because I'm born and raised South Philadelphia. Most of you know my story, and so for me, this is a very serious issue, and it has me thinking about the type of support that was there for me as a young man growing up in the streets of South Philadelphia, and the type of support that I didn't have, but therefore, through the grace of God, did go out. And so I speak from a sense of passion and personal experience, and I just thank all my colleagues for being on this call. I want to also acknowledge our majority leader, Councilwoman Sherelle Parker, also for being on the call, but also being an ally in addressing this issue. And so with that being said, for the sake of time in the next hearing, we are going to recess this very important hearing until Thursday, April the 15th at 1 p.m. and we'll pick up right where we started. But it will also give us a chance within this next week to continue to do a deeper dive, to have additional information and questions prepared for the next hearing. And so with that being said, this hearing is recessed. Madam Chair, thank you also for your partnership on this. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.